Chapter 1191. The office on the 5th floor of the castle was brightly lit. Xiao Mahai wrote the last name on the document in front of him, then quietly looked at the handwriting on the document, frowning in thought. As the supervisor of Emperor Dong's palace appointed by Li Tianlan, he was once a general of the desert prison in Zhongzhou State. He was seriously injured and dying in the bloody battle in the desert. His martial arts were almost destroyed by Gu Qianchuan. But like Moongaze and Song, because of Xinyuan Wushang's existence, Xiao Mahai's injury recovered extremely fast. Not only did his injury recover, but his body also recovered a certain degree of vitality when receiving treatment. His strength that was close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm recovered, and he even had the hope to set foot in the half-step invincible realm in his lifetime. It was definitely a blessing in disguise. For this general who had served him for 2 years under great pressure and countless ridicule, Li Tianlan gave him almost absolute trust. Xiao Mahai expressed his attitude toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan also expressed his attitude toward Xiao Mahai. As soon as Xiao Mahai's family was brought to Xinyuan City, Li Tianlan had already arranged a place for him. He was the chief seneschal of Emperor Dong's palace and also the second chief executive of Emperor Dong's palace. If the chief executive's power was limited to the internal affairs of Emperor Dong's palace, then the second chief executive's power was enough to cover all the properties of Emperor Dong's palace. He could be said to be the absolute core of the palace. The first chief administrative officer of Emperor Dong's palace was the military counselor. There were 2 deputy administrators. One of them was Xiao Mahai, and the other was the chief administrator of Xinyuan City. He was also the first candidate to succeed Ning Qianqing as the mayor of Xinyuan City in the future. He was just a nominal member of Emperor Dong's palace, and his role was to establish the position of Emperor Dong's palace in Tianan. So, strictly speaking, Li Tianlan was the only second chief executive in the real sense. The development of Emperor Dong's palace was very short. During the period of development, the internal hierarchy was not obvious. This could improve the cohesion of Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent, but it was also easy to cause chaos. Li Tianlan was the palace master, chief administrative officer, military advisor. Saint, hidden deity, and Li Shi were the 3 deputy palace masters. This was a clear hierarchy. Further down, the positions of Li Baitian and the others were a little blurry. As the mayor of Xinyuan City, Ning Qianqing's position in Emperor Dong's palace was also very subtle. Li Tianlan couldn't do anything about it. After he returned to Emperor Dong's palace, he intentionally or unintentionally avoided the main personnel framework of Emperor Dong's palace at this stage. Except for the appointment of several deputy palace masters and military counselor, the most important appointment was the appointment of Xiao Mahai. No matter what Li Tianlan meant to the outside world by putting Xiao Mahai in an important position, at least it was obvious that he attached great importance to the general director. Therefore, Xiao Mahai, who began to adapt to his new position as soon as he recovered from his injury, adapted very well. He handled the internal affairs of Emperor Dong's palace in an orderly manner, and he also did a good job in assisting the military counselor in dealing with external affairs. While everyone in Emperor Dong's palace was discussing the abnormal phenomena that day, Xiao Mahai was the only one who locked himself in his office and dealt with his work. Blue moon? He didn't see it at all. What really caught his attention was the list of forms in front of him, as well as a list that was constantly being drafted, deleted, and added. The name list was gradually perfected after constant editing. Xiao Mahai stretched, walked to the water dispenser, and poured a glass of water, intending to wrap up today's work. Li Tianlan's figure appeared in his sight at the moment he turned around. Xiao Mahai's palm trembled slightly. After seeing who it was, he breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Your Majesty, good evening." Li Tianlan casually responded with a hum. He leaned his body and pressed his fingers on the form and list that Xiao Mahai put on the table. "What's this?" "Some aid materials." Xiao Mahai was busy making tea for Li Tianlan, handing him a cigarette and attentively lighting it for him. Compared with the servile attitude when they first met, Director Xiao now got along with Li Tianlan much more naturally and sincerely. Li Tianlan nodded as if he didn't care about it at all. "Aid materials." There was a series of densely packed materials on the list. Food, clothes, tents, various instruments, mechanical equipment, and so on. There were a lot of materials, and the quantity of each kind was also very high. In addition, there was a batch of monetary aid. The long list of numbers looked beautiful under the light. 600 million. Li Tianlan blinked. Some of the things that were just drawn up today may be added. I need to discuss it with the chief administrative officer tomorrow. Xiao Mahai whispered. Li Tianlan asked and then gave his own answer. South America? Your Majesty is wise. Xiao Mahai nodded with a smile. The natural disaster in South America was very sudden. It is said that there was a large-scale aftershock not long ago, and the matter is very serious. According to experts, this super earthquake in South America can even affect the global continental plate in the next few decades. South America is now full of suffering. As a superpower in the dark world, it is our responsibility to help South America. At present, this is only the first batch of aid materials. According to the situation, we may need to invest more manpower, financial resources, and material resources to help South America rebuild after the disaster. What a pair of good eggs! Li Tianlan laughed. Xiao Mahai said that the superpowers in the dark world were like charities, but in fact, if there was no purpose, the so-called disaster relief and aid had nothing to do with the dark world. A force like Emperor Dong's palace, which had close ties with a superpower, might help, but it was only in response to a call. Now, Zhongzhou State had not communicated with Emperor Dong's palace about this matter, but Emperor Dong's palace had come up with a plan to help, which was very telling. Of course, the aid was real. The amount of aid they received would only increase. But the main reason wasn't any assistance at all. You want to take advantage of this? Will they march into South America? Li Tianlan asked. Xiao Mahai nodded. I had a brief communication with the military counselor and reached a consensus on this point. Your Majesty, South America is very weak now, and this weakness is multifaceted. Their sense of existence has never been too strong internationally, but in the dark world, South America has always been an area that everyone attaches great importance to. The situation there is complicated, and it is relatively chaotic in all aspects. It has always been the ideal base camp for many superpowers, not only because it is relatively easy to take root there, but also because they can take advantage of the chaotic and delicate situation there to get greater benefits. The Heroes Club and the Jiang family of South America have always been the giants in the dark world of South America. After the chaos in Snow Country, the leader of the fantasy world died, and the leaderless fantasy world began to try to develop in South America. In addition, there are a large number of small forces that are not popular in the whole dark world but are very influential in the local area. They take root there. For them, every chaos there is equivalent to a feast. Arms, drugs, smuggling, gold, jewelry, antiques. As long as you have strength, there are benefits everywhere. Your Majesty, we can take advantage of this opportunity to enter America in the name of aid and expand with Godibia as the center. This super earthquake is an unimaginable disaster for Godibia, but it's an unimaginable opportunity for us. And it's not just a super earthquake. I've confirmed the information from all sides. After the final battle in Beihai, although the dark world still has extremely powerful forces, such forces are too scattered, and there is no clear point of concentration. There are not many second-class forces that can be called, and a considerable number of them were buried in the final battle in Beihai. Now, not only America, but the whole dark world is in an unprecedented state of emptiness. Xiao Mahai's eyes were a little fiery. Your Majesty, you know what this means. America is just a starting point. We are qualified to fight for more things. Of course, Li Tianlan could understand what this meant. In the next few years, the entire Emperor Dong's palace would enter a stage of unimaginable crazy expansion. It was not an exaggeration to describe it as unimaginable and crazy. The development path of Emperor Dong's palace was the same as Li Tianlan's growth speed. They were both explosive. Li Tianlan's foundation was now in Zhongzhou State, and he had absorbed the Samsara Palace. Why hadn't the Samsara Palace been regarded as a superpower in the Dark World before? Even if they had experts at the peak of the invincible realm, murderous weapons, and the famous 12 supermasters, they were still first-class forces. The most important reason was that Samsara Palace did not have a stable foundation. Their strength was undeniable, but without a foundation to develop freely, it inevitably gave people a feeling of instability. What was missing after Emperor Dong's palace merged with Samsara Palace? Without the master of Samsara Palace at the peak of the invincible realm, but there was Li Tianlun. Without Fire Flaming, the invincible realm expert. But there were 3 more deputy palace masters of the invincible realm. A few heavenly masters at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm were missing. But there were also young experts such as Li Baitian, Bai Yuming, Su Chu, and Du Hanyin, as well as several top assassins of Sai City, such as Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. What else was missing? Perhaps there was still something missing. But now in Emperor Dong's palace, they now had a new foundation that they could develop freely and could be supported by a new group and a large amount of wealth. What kind of Emperor Dong's palace was this? The invincible Dong Huang. Li Shi, the deputy palace master at the peak of the invincible realm. The deputy palace master who was close to the peak of the invincible realm, the hidden god of Zhongzhou state, Sidu Tangyu. The deputy palace master of the invincible realm was Saint. In the field of wealth, he could be said to be the chief administrative military advisor. Bai Yuming of the half-step invincible realm. His combat capability was no less than that of Lin Yuxian and Li Baitian, who were at the top of the half-step invincible realm. He was the top assassin in the Dark World, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. There were too many people who could be named. The core power of Emperor Dong's palace was powerful enough to make most people despair in the Dark World. The rise of the new group was unstoppable. Outside Zhongzhou state, the current patriarch of the Lin clan was Li Tianlan's woman. The Dark Knights were also allies of Emperor Dong's palace. The Flourishing Age Fund also provided Emperor Dong's palace with massive wealth and connections. In this state, Emperor Dong's palace did not have to think about anything else. He had power, money, and talent. The only thing that Emperor Dong's palace needed to do now was to expand. It could even be said to be brainless expansion. Because he didn't need to worry about anything. The only task of Emperor Dong's palace was to spread the influence of Emperor Dong's palace to the entire Dark World in the name of Li Tianlun. But now, they were facing a broken world of darkness. America, Europe, Snow Country, East Island, Tiannan. There were opportunities everywhere. Both had excellent opportunities. Then do it. There was nothing to worry about. Your Majesty, about a few hours ago, I received a call from Lin Bujing. Xiao Mahai thought for a moment and continued to speak. Lin Bujing? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. He was not familiar with the name, but he was definitely not a stranger. Qin Weibai had mentioned the name to him. And those who knew the Lin clan also knew the name. This was the patriarch of the largest branch of the Lin clan in South America. He could be regarded as a top figure in all of America. The name Lin Bujing could almost be regarded as a world-class wealthy family. It had been rooted in America for nearly 200 years. It had spread its branches and was very involved in a wide range of fields. Jewelry, minerals, energy, tobacco, football, arms, gold, rubber, aerospace, banking. It was in all fields in South America. Lin Bujing's shadow. Even in the entire Lin clan, he was a super heavyweight branch patriarch. He is one of the core figures of the Lin clan and a friend of Mr. Lin Fengting. Xiao Mahai chuckled and said, in fact, on the day of the decisive battle in Beihai, Lin Bujing contacted the elites of the Men in Black, Fantasy World, the Heroes Club, and several other forces. They rushed into the headquarters of the Jiang family of South America and destroyed 6 secret bases of the Jiang family of South America in one day. At the same time, more than 80% of the core members of the Jiang family of South America were wiped out. Now in South America, there are not only natural disasters but also man-made disasters. It's very lively. Lin Bujing hopes to cooperate with Emperor Dong's palace. He sincerely invites us to march into South America and hopes that Your Majesty can visit South America when you have time. Now they have parted ways with the Heroes Club and several other forces. But according to the prior agreement, Lin Bujing will not infringe on the interests of the Heroes Club, the Men in Black, and other forces. Xiao Mahai's voice was somewhat meaningful. Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat and he whispered, "He hopes that we can help him deal with the Heroes Club and the Men in Black? We have no reason to refuse." Xiao Mahai said with a smile. "Old fox." Li Tianlan laughed and scolded. He said it was cooperation, but in fact, he wants us to clean up the mess for him? If it can be cleaned up, it won't be a mess. Xiao Mahai smiled and lowered his head to look at the list on the table. Li Tianlan was also looking down at the list. His eyes fell on a name at the top of the list and he narrowed his eyes. There were about a dozen names on the list, but they had been deleted, changed, and constantly smeared, almost covering the whole piece of paper. But all the changes were concentrated on the names in the middle area. The names at the top and the names at the bottom had not been changed from beginning to end. The name listed alone at the top was undoubtedly the most suitable candidate in Xiao Mahai's mind to represent Emperor Dong's palace to develop its foundation in South America. This was the first time that Emperor Dong's palace had expanded to a distant place. This person could undoubtedly be regarded as the commander of this expansion. If he could gain a foothold in South America, from the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, he could be said to be a vassal of Emperor Dong's palace and a high-ranking official of border provinces. Emperor Dong's palace currently ranked third, but he was the most powerful deputy palace master. This was Xiao Mahai's choice. He hoped that Li Shi could lead the team to America and become the stabilizing force of Emperor Dong's palace's expansion in America. She has just come to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan knocked on the table. I know. Xiao Mahai nodded with a smile. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly. You know. Xiao Mahai's smile was very subtle. Li Tianlan also smiled and said calmly, "What are you worried about?" "I'm not worried, Your Majesty." Xiao Mahai said softly, "I'm just trying to avoid accidents to the greatest extent. In any form, any accidents that may be bad for Emperor Dong's palace are my job." There is no doubt about the strength of Deputy Palace Master Li Shi. The situation in America is complicated. The Heroes Club, Fantasy World, and even the remaining power of the Jiang family of South America. Although these forces have no leader, the foundation of the super forces should not be underestimated. Lin Bujing's initiative to cooperate with us is also a very good start. Under such circumstances, we should have a meticulous and powerful person over there who can suppress all the forces. Considering all the conditions, Deputy Palace Master Li Shi is the most suitable one. He is in America. For America and here, it is the most responsible way to avoid accidents. Li Tianlan did not speak. Xiao Mahai gritted his teeth and simply continued, not only Deputy Palace Master Li Shi, but also Deputy Palace Master Situ. If necessary, it is also a good choice for Deputy Palace Master Situ to go to Europe. Your Majesty, we have a good relationship with the Dark Knights. Europe is much more lively than America. If we expand to Europe, Deputy Palace Master Situ will certainly contribute a lot. Why not Li Shi go to Europe, but Hidden God go to America? Li Tianlan smiled faintly. Deputy Palace Master Li Shi is a little stronger. Xiao Mahai's voice was soft and slow. Although the situation in Europe is more complicated, we have natural allies there. The Dark Knights will help us a lot. In South America, Mr. Lin Fengting will not always be in South America. Although the strength of the Lin clan in South America is very strong, they now have no invincible realm experts. Good reason, Li Tianlan said flatly. Xiao Mahai fell silent and just stared at the list on the table in front of him. This list could be said to be quite interesting. Xiao Mahai was already considering Situ Cangyue, but after all, he had not yet carried it out. In the list that he had begun to draw up to America, Li Shi was the leader, and Xiao Mahai assigned her as his deputy, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City. Li Tianlan shook his head slightly. It's too deliberate. The list needs to continue to be changed. It's all up to Your Majesty. Xiao Mahai's smile was meticulous. In fact, Both of them were very clear about the real intention of arranging Li Shi to America and even Situ Tsangyue to Europe. Although Li Tianlan felt that it was not necessary, he would not completely deny his butler's suggestion. He picked up the list and put it aside, saying flatly, "Li Kuangtu will not stay here for too long." Li Kuangtu had become his prisoner. As a prisoner, after he was brought to Xinyuan City from Nanyun by Li Tianlan, he had fallen into a deep coma because of serious injuries. Li Tianlan kept Li Kuangtu here, and he also stayed here. When Xinyuan Wushang rushed back, Li Tianlan was ready to seriously solve the problem between him and the purgatory of heaven capital. When Li Kuangtu was still in Emperor Dong's palace, he sent Li Shi and Situ Tsangyue to other places. From Xiao Mahai's point of view, it was to prevent accidents. From Li Tianlan's point of view, this matter was actually not a bad thing. Xiao Mahai smiled and whispered, "Your Majesty is wise." Chapter 1192. Li Tianlan looked at the list in front of him again, shook his head, and said nothing. If every leader of a superpower had to work hard day and night, then the current Li Tianlan was undoubtedly not qualified to do so. The previous master of Samsara Palace was also unqualified. In the past, military counselor was in charge of a series of things in Samsara Palace: how to develop, intelligence, various industries, and all aspects of contacts. Now, as the chief administrative officer of Emperor Dong's palace, military counselor's position in Emperor Dong's palace was even greater than when he was in Samsara Palace. His power was even greater than that of the 3 deputy palace lords of Emperor Dong's palace whose division of labor was unclear. Outside of martial arts, Li Tianlan had always been a relatively lazy person. He was also ambitious, but he had no ambition at the same time. A few years ago, when he entered Huading from the border of Zhongzhou State, his ambition and desire were growing every minute and second. But in essence, what he desired was not the power that could overturn the court and the opposition, nor the wealth that could rival a country. What he desired was to let the Li family return to the peak of Zhongzhou State. He had enough power now. The rise of the new group was constantly impacting the pattern of Zhongzhou State. After the election in 10 months, under the new situation of Zhongzhou State, Li Tianlan could definitely be regarded as one of the most powerful people in Zhongzhou State. The wealth of the Flourishing Age Fund was in the trillions, and it had the most terrifying cash flow. There were countless other industries hidden under the water. To some extent, the industry of the Flourishing Age Fund was a miracle of wealth created by Qin Weibai using spacetime. From the moment Qin Weibai came to this world, it was no longer a question of whether she could grasp the future or not. No one could see through the future, but she could see through it. No one could know the future. She was completely clear that in this case, if she wanted to accumulate wealth, it would be as easy as taking something out of her pocket. In the past 2 decades, the Flourishing Age Fund had footprints in various emerging profiteering industries all over the world. It was used to the extreme during the financial crisis, and the Flourishing Age Fund grew rapidly. In the financial crisis, it began to annex physical industries and buy shares of various multinational groups. Its wealth was increasing. Military counselor once gave Li Tianlan a document, which detailed the industries that the Flourishing Age Fund really controlled and the cash that could be mobilized in the shortest time. How many industries did the Flourishing Age Fund actually control? The dark world was still not completely clear. But the form was extremely clear, listing the current assets of the Flourishing Age Fund in detail. For example, the Ofi Oil Group had deep cooperation with Zhongzhou State 6 years ago. This international giant signed a 20-year oil agreement with Zhongzhou State 6 years ago would provide Zhongzhou State with 60 million tons of oil every year. This 20-year agreement had a transaction value of as high as trillions of Zhongzhou State. The Flourishing Age Fund had begun to attack Offutt Petroleum Group as early as 10 years ago. Now, it had quietly occupied 23% of Offutt Petroleum Group's shares. The Flourishing Age Fund began to attack Ofi Oil Group as early as 10 years ago, and had and occupied a 23. And occupied. Tianan, and there were many and in of. The detailed information given to Li Tianlan by military counselor had nearly 1,000 pages and millions of words. Li Tianlan still kept the information in the drawer. He didn't even bother to count the zeros on the first page of the information about how many companies the Flourishing Age Fund controlled, not to mention how many companies the Flourishing Age Fund controlled. He only knew that it was an astronomical figure that he could squander at will, even in several lifetimes. When wealth reached that level, it really became a simple number. Li Tianlan didn't care about these things at all. In his more than 20 years of life, his only obsession was to let the Li family stand on the highest stage of Zhongzhou state again. But which Li family was the so-called Li family? The Purgatory of Heaven capital? Or the Emperor Dong's palace today? With the death of Li Honghe, Li Tianlan and Li Guangtu each represented a part of the Li family. They were both the so-called orthodox, but neither of them was orthodox. He was pushed to the present position and had the qualification to look down on the heroes in the world. But looking back on his more than 20 years of life, Li Tianlan's heart was full of confusion. He couldn't find the meaning of life. Invincible in the world, powerful in the court and commoners, rich as a country. All of this looked beautiful. But it just looked beautiful. What was the point of all of this? He was too lazy to intervene in the decision-making of the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace and the future development of Emperor Dong's palace. The world was changing, and opportunities appeared in front of him one after another. They were at his fingertips, and he seemed to have reached the peak. In this world, opportunities were everywhere. He just quietly watched Emperor Dong's palace continue to develop and grow stronger. There was not the slightest bit of complacency in his heart. Occasionally, a trace of loss and loneliness flashed through his heart. Whatever. Li Tianlan knocked on the list in front of him again. Pay attention to the method. Xiao Mahai nodded silently. What's the matter with my room? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. This was the reason why he came to Xiao Mahai. After returning here, Li Tianlan didn't have time to go to his room to rest. But now the whole Emperor Dong's palace was under his perception. In other words, as long as he wanted, no matter where he was, in the area covered by his sword energy, he could see every corner and appear anywhere. Under such circumstances, it could be said that he had a clear view of the situation in his room. I hope your majesty will like it. Shemerhai smiled. Li Tianlan's eyes were a little strange, and so was his voice. Do you really think that little Bai has a good temper? Aren't you afraid that she will punish you? I'm just doing what your majesty wants. Xiao Mahai said righteously, and with your majesty's current identity, it's normal to have a servant of the half-step invincible realm. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth. A servant of the half-step invincible realm was really rare. A servant close to the top of the half-step invincible realm was even rarer. And a servant whose body, temperament, and appearance were close to the top, and whose strength was close to the top of the half-step invincible realm, was simply a treasure. For example, the one in Li Tianlan's room. She was a bit outrageous. The small white suspenders completely exposed her slender neck and snow-white shoulders. The snow-white pride on her chest was clearly outlined, and the looming deep ravine looked mysterious and tempting. The suspenders were very short, and her slender, white, and tender waist was completely exposed to Li Tianlan's perception. She wore a white miniskirt, and the black stockings showed her extremely soft and beautiful curves. The silver-white glittering high-heeled shoes had very high heels, so every time she bent down, the extent was higher than normal, so that Li Tianlan could even clearly see the translucent gauze in his perception. She was more than 1.6 meters tall, not tall, but extremely well-proportioned and slender. Her long hair reached her waist, and her face was cold, arrogant, and enchanting. It was a kind of seductive temperament that emanated from her bones. At this time, she was standing quietly in front of the mirror, practicing her expressions in front of the mirror. Charming, shy, pitiful, stubborn, proud, reluctant, pure, coquettish, cold, different expressions, different temperaments. She was able to control each of them perfectly. Li Tianlan couldn't describe this feeling for a moment. The other party's various changes were natural and real. If he had to describe it, just 2 words. Professional. No matter how she teased and seduced the opposite sex, The other party's every move seemed to have a kind of professionalism that she had received strict professional training. And this conclusion was drawn by Li Tianlan in the process of observation. If the other party didn't stand in front of the mirror and constantly change her state, then every state she showed was absolutely real. This servant is very professional. Li Tianlan glanced at Xiao Mahai. Xiao Mahai's expression slightly tightened, but he misunderstood Li Tianlan's meaning. He said as if to guarantee, "Your Majesty, I have asked carefully. So far, she is still pure. No man with her previous identity, no one dared to force her. It is said that a prince has been pursuing her, but she didn't give him a chance." The current palace master of Liuhua Palace was also the only capable superior of the half-step invincible realm in East Island. Mai Shiranui. When Emperor Dong's palace swept the whole East Island on the night of the final battle in Beihai, Mai Shiranui detained Li Beidian and wanted to be Li Tianlan's woman. Li Tianlan said that he needed a maid. He didn't know what the other party was thinking. She couldn't help but agree to Li Tianlan's request, and she came so soon. Li Tianlan didn't care about a maid. But with such an exaggerated dress, the other party seemed to want to take off all her clothes and live in his room. "Did you arrange those clothes?" Li Tianlan looked at Xiao Mahai silently. Mai Shiranui had changed several sets of clothes in the room, and without exception, they were all extremely sexy and revealing clothes. Li Tianlan even found several uniforms, including those of a flight attendant, a nurse, a teacher, and an East Island military uniform. There was also a searcher and a student uniform that countless otakus couldn't help but have a variety of styles. Li Tianlan looked at Xiao Mahai with some pity in his eyes. If this was really arranged by Xiao Mahai, it would be strange if Qin Weibai didn't skin him alive when she came back. It was one thing for Qin Weibai to be generous, but it was another thing for others to be generous for her. "What clothes?" Xiao Mahai was stunned. "I haven't had time to prepare clothes." He showed a knowing smile that all men understood. "If your Majesty has any special needs, I'll arrange it right away." In Li Tianlan's perception, Mai Shiranui gently licked the moist corners of her mouth, slightly raised her eyebrows, and her eyes were stubborn and proud. An indescribable charm rippled from her little by little. Li Tianlan was stunned and scolded with a smile, "Get out of here. If Little Bai hears this, you'll suffer in the future." Xiao Mahai scratched his head. "Madam said that she would stay in Yuzhou for a few more days, and Mai Shiranui won't stay in Emperor Dong's palace for too long." This time she came back to make her attitude clear. She hasn't fully handled the internal affairs of Liuhua Palace. It is said that she has already planned to take action against Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, so she hopes to report the situation to you alone. If possible, she hopes that your Majesty can send some people to help. Xiao Mahai's voice paused, hesitated for a second, and continued, "Your Majesty, this woman is ambitious and seems to be willing to pay. If we help her, Liuhua Palace will become the first power in East Island sooner or later." "There is no Liuhua Palace." Li Tianlan said blandly. "From now on, Liuhua Palace will become a branch of Emperor Dong's palace in East Island." Xiao Mahai nodded thoughtfully, and seemed to have begun to consider how much support to give to Liuhua Palace. Now the internal problems of Emperor Dong's palace were very complicated, and the most urgent problem to solve was to clarify the division of labor among the core personnel. Xiao Mahai was now the general director of Emperor Dong's palace. Before he came to Emperor Dong's palace, the person in charge of all the internal affairs of Emperor Dong's palace was an excellent graduate named Fairy Tail. Fairy Tail was a student of the Sky Academy in the same year as Li Tianlan and Li Beiyin. When she graduated, she was not famous. Her strength at the peak of the fire-flaming realm was not bad, but not too outstanding. After joining Emperor Dong's palace, she began to show her strength, and now she had vaguely touched the threshold of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Because of Xiao Mahai, Li Tianlan did not clarify Fairy Tail's duties after returning to Emperor Dong's palace. Until now, almost all of Fairy Tail's duties overlapped with Xiao Mahai's, and Xiao Mahai had the absolute leadership, so that Fairy Tail, who used to be a core member of Emperor Dong's palace, now seemed to be Xiao Mahai's assistant. Fairy Tail was very steady, meticulous, and had a strong sense of belonging to Emperor Dong's palace. So in the face of all this, she did not say much and was very cooperative with Xiao Mahai. But no problem did not mean no problem. There were more and more such things, and they became the most urgent thing to be solved. The most obvious overlap between Fairy Tale and Xiao Mahai was their work. Not to mention the two of them. Li Baidian, Bai Yuming, Su Chu, Du Hanyin, and Yu Qingyan, who had been with Li Tianlan since the beginning, did not have any clear duties in Emperor Dong's palace. Now there was 1.5 corps that truly belonged to Emperor Dong's palace. That half was the Snowdance Corps, which had been stationed in the eastern part of Europe for several years. The other was the Nightmare Corps, which had always been in Tiannan. The internal structure of the Nightmare Corps, which had less than 2,000 people, had always been vague. It was divided into 4 brigades. The 4 captains were all in the Thundershocking realm, and the 2 deputy captains were also in the Thundershocking realm. In each brigade, there were 3 squadrons. Each squadron was divided into several detachments. Then there were the teams that were divided into groups. The leadership of the Nightmare Corps changed relatively frequently, but at least there was a relatively clear structure. The commander of the corps was Lin Yuxian, the former heir of the Lin clan. But the unclear ones were the high-level members. Strictly speaking, Li Baidian and others were the high-level members of the Nightmare Corps, but they had no specific duties. They were very familiar with each other and had a very good friendship. In just 2 years, there were no problems. But as Emperor Dong's palace merged with Sai City, and Saint and military counselor joined Emperor Dong's palace, everything began to change. There was only one Nightmare Corps in Emperor Dong's palace. In other words, the Nightmare Corps was responsible for all the combat and guard tasks in Emperor Dong's palace. They needed to go out to fight, guard inside, and transport materials. All the tasks related to combatants were handled by the Nightmare Corps. Therefore, the new members of Emperor Dong's palace had to join the Nightmare Corps. It was worth noting that Situ Cangyue was different from Wei Kunlun. Situ Cangyue entered Emperor Dong's palace with the entire Sai City. However, Wei Kunlun did not represent Shu Mountain. From the moment he joined Emperor Dong's palace, he voluntarily gave up his identity as the eldest brother of Mount Shu and the Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu. He left the Nirvana Sword of Mount Shu and gave the power of Mount Shu to his second brother, Han Chongyang, and only joined Emperor Dong's palace with some of his trusted subordinates. But even so, Saint brought 4 superiors of the Thundershocking realm and hundreds of swordsmen to Emperor Dong's palace, one of whom was at the peak of the Thundershocking realm. The power of Mount Shu could be said to be full of confidence in Emperor Dong's palace. First of all, as the great Void Sword Master of Mount Shu, Li Baidian was a brother who grew up with Li Tianlan. Wei Kunlun was also the Vice Palace Lord. All of this was enough to make everyone in Mount Shu feel confident in Emperor Dong's palace. Other than the power of Shu Mountain, the other core power came from the Jade Pool. There were no superiors of the Invincible Realm in Jade Pool. But Bai Yuming, Su Chu, and Dongqing Rushi were all from Jade Pool, and even Ning Qianxing was one of the disciples of Jade Pool. Over the past 2 years, at least hundreds of young disciples of Jade Pool had joined Emperor Dong's palace under the influence of these people, and now they had become a core part of Emperor Dong's palace. The bloody battle in the desert had killed more than half of the elite forces of the Nightmare Legion, but the survivors had been promoted to more important positions, such as squad leader, branch leader, and even squadron leader. These graduates from the 2 academies were not from Jade Pool or Mount Shu, and had nothing to do with Sai City. As graduates of the same year, most of them were familiar with each other, and they formed a group completely spontaneously. Therefore, in Emperor Dong's palace, there was an academy faction formed by graduates from the 2 academies. The second was the least number but the most senior generation of the Li family. In more than 2 years, the Tianluo Hall in the Purgatory of Heaven capital gradually moved to Emperor Dong's palace. This agency, which used to be responsible for all the intelligence work in the Purgatory of Heaven capital, made up for the lack of intelligence in Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent. After merging with the Flourishing Age Fund, it became more pervasive. In the Purgatory of Heaven capital, there were also some old people of the Li family who returned to Emperor Dong's palace after Li Honghe's death. Li Tianlan was the heir of the Li family appointed by Li Honghe himself, not Li Guangtu. This alone was enough to make some old people of the Li family choose to join Emperor Dong's palace. This group of people was the quietest. Most of them did not have specific duties and were relatively detached. After joining Emperor Dong's palace, these people gradually began to leave Tiannan one by one. It was not a betrayal, but they went to a more suitable place for them. This group of veterans of the Li family now had two ordinary figures in the outside world, and they were also recognized by the outside world as the backbone of the new group. Qing Ye, the minister of the Ministry of Security of Zhongzhou State. Tian Ying, the deputy commander of the Snowdance Corps. Qing Ye's ascension was the compromise of the academics during the internal shuffle between the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. Of course, this department, which had been firmly controlled by the Southeast Group, let Qing Ye ascend, which also meant to sow discord. But anyway, in the past 2 years, Qing Ye had completely gained a foothold in the Ministry of Security and then began to absorb the former veterans of the Li family one by one. Tianying was expected to be the person pushed by the Giant Group to compete for the position of commander of the Border Control Corps. But after many attempts, Dongqing Wudi finally transferred Tianying to the Snowdance Corps because the resistance was too great. Now the commander of the Snowdance Corps was Cheng Huaining, the commander of the Zhongzhou State Army Corps in Europe. After the election, Cheng Huaining would probably be transferred back to Zhongzhou State. It was almost a foregone conclusion that Tianying would become the commander of the Zhongzhou State Army Corps in Europe. The candidate for the commander of the Snowdance Corps was Fireman, the senior combat staff officer of the Snowdance Corps. This was another old man of the Li family. Decades ago, he was the strongest fire-flaming realm expert in the Dark World. Today, decades later, he was still the strongest fire-flaming realm expert in the Dark World. He and Tianying controlled the Snowdance Corps and the European garrison respectively, which meant that Emperor Dong's palace had completely controlled the 5 Eastern European countries that Li Tianlan had obtained in the chaos of Snow Country. There were also new generations among the veterans of the Li family. It was said that Li Wangxing, one of the 4 spirits of Zhongzhou State, would also reach a new position in the rise of the new group. At present, the most ideal thing seemed to be to directly control a corps in the Border Control Corps. If his transfer went well, the old men of the Li family would have a new place to go. At present, the old men of the Li family were indeed veterans. They joined Emperor Dong's palace spontaneously, but the overall structure was not chaotic at all. It was orderly, structured, and clear. What was more valuable was that there was a clear follow-up plan and a clear division of labor, which did not make Li Tianlan feel embarrassed at all. They arranged themselves clearly. In addition to the team of the old men of the Li family, the remaining forces of Sai City, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, and the Academy inevitably looked a little messy. As more and more forces joined Emperor Dong's palace, the dissatisfaction caused by the unclear dividends were gradually brewing. Xiao Mahai hadn't been in Emperor Dong's palace for a long time, but he could clearly sense that the relationship between Li Baitian, Cool Breeze, and Drifting Cloud had become subtle. Although they hadn't become enemies, this sign was enough for Xiao Mahai to be highly vigilant. Any entity was made up of a combination of different forces. There were factions within factions. This was something unavoidable for any force. Under such circumstances, how to make their internal framework clearer was something that every ruler had to consider. The various forces from Sai City, Mount Shu, and Jade Pool formed the current Emperor Dong's palace and the new group. The new group, Emperor Dong's palace, and several other groups formed Zhongzhou State. On the other hand, it was the same. This was a normal phenomenon. Layer by layer, from an individual to a whole, it was clear and distinct. Xiao Mahai also wanted to build a clear framework for Emperor Dong's palace. It was specific to each person's position and responsibility. Just like the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State. Zhongyuan and Yuzhou of the Giant Group. Beihai and Wuyue of the Southeast Group. Southwest and Tianfu of the Prince Group. North City of the North Group. Northeast and Northwest of the Academics. Special Warfare Agencies of the Special Warfare Group. Every group knew where its foundation was, what it should do, and its position. In such a situation, they would fight, but as long as they knew where their position was, Zhongzhou state would never be in chaos. The main reason why Emperor Dong's palace was in such a situation was that it developed too fast. It could even be said that it had reached the sky in a single bound. The Dark World was caught off guard by this situation. And Emperor Dong's palace itself wasn't mentally prepared for this situation. It developed too fast, its foundation was too small, and there were too many talents. Xianyuan City was too small, and this stage couldn't accommodate too many talents who could take charge on their own. The self-adjustment of the veterans of the Li family relieved the pressure of Emperor Dong's palace to some extent. But it wasn't enough. It was far from enough. So Xiao Mahai was very anxious. He was anxious to expand. This was the best way to deal with the current situation. To expand to East Island, to America, to further strengthen the rule over Tiannan, to Europe, to the interior of Zhongzhou state, and to Snow Country. Xiao Mahai could totally imagine the main theme of Emperor Dong's palace in the next few years. The sharpness of Emperor Dong's palace would truly radiate to the entire Dark World. It would fight on 2 fronts, 3 fronts, and multiple fronts. Emperor Dong's palace had the strength now, so it naturally had to do it. This would be an extremely crazy era of expansion. According to the speculation of Xiao Mahai and others, if Emperor Dong's palace didn't take any action, then the internal chaos would probably really change in February next year. February next year. The new batch of graduates from the 2 academies was about to graduate. Emperor Dong's palace had been eyeing this batch of students since the day it was established. They were the most important fresh blood of Emperor Dong's palace. When this fresh blood flowed into Emperor Dong's palace, and Emperor Dong's palace still didn't take any big action, as time went by, the relationship network inside Emperor Dong's palace would get out of control sooner or later. Therefore, expansion was imperative. Only by constantly expanding and expanding its own base could all kinds of talents in Emperor Dong's palace play their role and find their own positions. A new army, a new organizational structure, a new leader. Xiao Mahai was completely silent. His brain was almost completely occupied by all kinds of storms. Originally, he had planned to get off work, have dinner, and take a walk in Emperor Dong's palace to relax. But as more and more thoughts appeared in his mind, he returned to his desk and began to sort out the expected list after list, as well as the future military plan of Emperor Dong's palace. As a former general of Zhongzhou state, Xiao Mahai had not only the down-and-out time when he managed the desert prison, but also the high-spirited time when he led the army. His down-and-out was only because of his background, and it had nothing to do with his ability. If he was a mediocre person, he wouldn't have been favored by the giant group back then, and they even planned to pull him into the camp of the giant group. Such a Xiao Mahai might not know professional economic development, and he also lacked some overall view. But in terms of pure management and planning, he was absolutely not worse than anyone else. The sound of the helicopter's rotors faintly rang out outside the window. Li Tianlan looked at Xiao Mahai, who was already sitting behind his desk with a focused expression. He smiled and turned slightly. The next second, his figure appeared on the tarmac 1,000 meters away from the castle. The helicopter slowly landed from the air. Li Tianlan raised his head slightly. In the roaring wind, his gorgeous black windbreaker was constantly fluttering in the airflow. The helicopter landed not far from Li Tianlan. The hatch opened, and the chubby Xianyuan Wushang and the huge Xing Tian came out. Xianyuan Wushang's face was a little pale, livid. He looked at Li Tianlan and seemed to want to force a smile. But as soon as the corner of his mouth moved, he suddenly retched. Li Tianlan felt helpless. Xianyuan Wushang, the so-called doctor, was completely unfathomable, even in Li Tianlan's heart. This had nothing to do with the specific force. His treatment of patients had completely exceeded the understanding of everyone in this era. It was a kind of subversion of ideas, a unique means that science and even metaphysics could not explain. And such a person was seriously airsick, seasick, and even carsick. It was better if the journey was short. The relatively spacious private plane was better. But Xianyuan Wushang obviously couldn't adapt to the helicopter. It was thousands of kilometers from Yuzhou to Xianyuan City, and Xianyuan Wushang completely endured it. When he got off the plane, he couldn't bear it anymore, squatting aside and began to vomit. No matter how loyal Li Tianlan was to his brother, he didn't want to go over and admire it carefully. It was not until he was almost done vomiting and drank a large bottle of purified water that Li Tianlan shook his head slightly. "Look at you." Xianyuan Wushang laughed, his voice a little hoarse. He liked this place very much, but he really couldn't get used to the means of transportation here. The slight bumps on the car and the constant shaking on the plane all made him extremely annoyed and even anxious. That kind of enclosed narrow space was even more of a pain in the ass. With the technical level of the time corridor, even the worst single mecha or small spaceship, which had been eliminated for dozens of generations, could be equipped with holographic projections that could pass off as real and an absolutely still state of sight. After coming here, all the means of transportation really felt uncomfortable no matter how he experienced it. "I think I should find an apostle to tailor a bicycle for me, or an electric car, or a motorcycle, the kind that doesn't need refueling. That kind of transportation may be the most suitable for me." Xianyuan Wushang muttered to himself. Li Tianlan didn't know who the apostle was, so he repeated again, "Look at you." "Hee hee," Xianyuan Wushang suddenly laughed. He was indeed a good-for-nothing, but compared to Lin Shi, he also had the capital to gloat. The blockade of the real environment was a foregone conclusion, which meant that Lin Shi was still in America. Virtual shuttle. Under this level of suppression, it was completely bullsh*t. The ninth prince of the time corridor was now studying how to buy a plane ticket in the Americas with a counterfeit phone. No one knew if his phone had internet, and no one knew if the ninth prince, who was alone in a foreign country, could communicate with the locals. When they set off for Tiananmen, Saint was ready to return to Beihai, while the apostle planned to virtual shuttle to America to bring Lin Shi back. Under the suppression of the real environment, even if it was a peak apostle, the distance each virtual travel was less than 1,000 meters. Moving all the way from Serene Province, even if his stamina could keep up, he would still be as tired as a dog. No matter how he thought about it, he felt incredibly bitter. "I heard that you showed your power today. You fought 1 against 3 and even caught 1 alive." Xianyuan Wushang laughed. "How do you know?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "A few minutes ago, the news came out from a certain channel. Now the whole Zhongzhou state is probably crazy. Li Guangtu, Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun. 3 against 1, but they are still no match for you. No one can believe that Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun would join hands, and they can't believe that the 3 of them are no match for you. From now on, you are truly invincible in the world, big brother." Xianyuan Wushang gave him a thumbs up. Li Tianlan frowned slightly and subconsciously touched his phone, only to find that it was not with him at all. It could be expected that he must have a lot of missed calls now. He narrowed his eyes and vaguely sensed an unusual aura. He was besieged by Jiang Shangyu and the other 2 without any bystanders. News from a special channel? What kind of special channel? It should be the news released by Jiang Shangyu. Xianyuan Wushang touched his chin. Although the news of the defeat is not glorious, the fact is here. Even if they don't say it, it can't be hidden. And the image of your invincibility has probably been deeply rooted in people's hearts. Although it sounds incredible to fight 1 against 3, it is not unacceptable. That's why Jiang Shangyu released the news in a hurry. To some extent, it is a warning. A warning. Li Tianlan smiled coldly. "Zhongzhou state has scruples about you." Xianyuan Wushang said softly. Jiang Shangyu pulled the strings in the middle and let Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun join hands. The whole dark world is very surprised, but for the current high-level officials of Zhongzhou state, this can be regarded as good news. Li Tianlan was expressionless. Li Huaqing's way of protecting Gu Xingyun is very obvious. He wants to protect 1 Gu Xingyun, not to mention 3. He knows very well that Gu Xingyun can't balance Emperor Dong's palace alone, but even so, he wants to protect him. Now there are 3, which is a surprise for him. Jiang Shangyu released the news, which is undoubtedly to tell Zhongzhou state that Li Guangtu is now in your hands. Xianyuan Wushang smiled. If there is no accident, maybe Zhongzhou state will soon ask you for him. They don't have a suitable reason. Li Tianlan said blandly. Asking for him is the most important thing. They can find a reason at any time, at any time. Xinyuan Wushang shook his head. These are not important. The important thing is, if Zhongzhou State really asks, will you give him or not? Xinyuan Wushang asked this question very cautiously, because the meaning behind it was very profound. If Zhongzhou State asked Emperor Dong's palace for Li Kuangtu, to give him or not to give him, this was definitely a problem. The current situation was too sensitive. It was easy for Li Tianlan to make a decision, but he had to pay for it. There was no doubt that if he gave him to Li Kuangtu, Li Tianlan and even Emperor Dong's palace would be very uncomfortable in the future. Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, and Gu Xingyun were indeed no match for Li Tianlan. But when it came to the internal affairs of Zhongzhou State, many things could not be solved by force at all. There might be few saber lights and sword shadows, but in many cases, mutual deception was the most fatal. But if he didn't give them to Li Kuangtu, there might be many results. But no matter what the result was, Emperor Dong's palace would not feel good. Let's go. Li Tianlan slowly turned around. His figure flickered slightly in the night, appearing and disappearing from time to time. The ethereal sword energy gently fluctuated with his flickering in an imperceptible range. Xinyuan Wushang was stunned. He tried to feel the faint sword energy around him, and his eyes shone. How is Li Kuangtu now? Xinyuan Wushang asked. He's seriously injured and in a coma. Li Tianlan said casually, wake him up first. We have a lot to talk about. What about Zhongzhou State? Xinyuan Wushang asked tentatively. We'll talk about it after we talk. Li Tianlan said calmly. Chapter 1193. When the accurate news was passed through various departments to the Hidden Dragon Sea, Li Huaqing was discussing the layout of the academics for the next 5 years with Hua Jingyang. This was the most important thing for the academics at the moment. Li Huaqing had already been confirmed to be re-elected, and his position was so stable that there could be no more changes. In the past 10 years, due to the lack of foundation of the academics, although Li Huaqing had risen to the top, his style of doing things was relatively mild. The entire academics seemed to be struggling in the game with other groups, so they did not achieve the expected influence in 10 years. According to the normal development, if Li Huaqing retired next year, it would definitely be an unprecedented failure for the academics. They might still be in the ranks of the 6, but they would be suppressed by the Prince Group of the Southeast Group in all aspects. It would even be difficult for them to compare with the giant group after the reshuffle. This was far from their expectations. In their expectations, during the 10 years when Li Huaqing was in power, even if the academics could not surpass the Prince Group of the Southeast Group to become the first group in Zhongzhou State, they should at least keep pace with the 2 ancient groups. If they had to survive in the shadow of other groups in the end, they could not accept this result at all. Fortunately, the change of the Wang family of Beihai and the rise of Emperor Dong's palace disrupted the rhythm of the major groups. Li Huaqing had another 5 years of precious time. In recent months, the backbone of the academics had come to Yuzhou intentionally or unintentionally. By taking the opportunity of reporting, they quietly exhorted Li Huaqing, hoping that Li Huaqing could pay more attention to the future of the team. The 2 remaining elders of the academics also came to Yuzhou to talk to Li Huaqing about this issue. They did not say anything explicitly, but the meaning was clear. They hoped that Li Huaqing could unite the forces that should be united most. This was undoubtedly telling Li Huaqing that he should take advantage of the 5 years to grasp the future of the academics. As the leader, Li Huaqing clearly felt the pressure from the inside. This pressure had existed as early as 2 years ago. The internal dissatisfaction of the academics with the status quo would become dissatisfaction with him over time. However, this dissatisfaction had not reached its peak. The news that he could be re-elected had come out, temporarily suppressing the undercurrent within the academics. However, the problem always existed, and it must be a problem worthy of facing. Li Huaqing's position seemed to be supreme, but no matter how much he cherished his country, he had to stabilize the internal situation. If there was no one supporting him internally, he couldn't do anything. Hua Jingyang's arrangement was the clearest signal. Li Huaqing's attitude was extremely firm. He wanted Hua Xingyang to be the head of the cabinet. This was also the greatest demand of the academics in this election. If they succeeded, the academics could guarantee that they would become the most powerful group in the next 5 years. After pushing Hua Xingyang to the top, there were still many internal adjustments to be made. With less than a year to go before the election, all the major groups were optimizing and adjusting their structures in order to form the most powerful group. It's not a big problem with the military. In the deep night, the office was brightly lit. Li Huaqing took a sip of tea and looked at Hua Xingyang. He smiled and said, "Minister Dong Cheng is quite cooperative. We have studied the candidates carefully. I know that the candidates you recommended are quite capable. The official appointment should be in 1 or 2 months. Tell them to be careful." It seemed that he had made up his mind to adjust his thinking. In a private occasion, Li Huaqing's words were very clear. Hua Xingyang nodded and frowned. "How about the Praetorian Corps? We haven't talked about it yet. This issue is sensitive. Let's find a suitable opportunity." Li Huaqing felt a little helpless. Hua Xingyang snorted. He was a little dissatisfied. Of course, it was directed at Dongqing Wudi. The academics had never had a great influence on the army headquarters. In the most dangerous time, their control over the army headquarters was even far inferior to that of the Prince Group and the Giant Group. It was Qi Baitsong, the leader of the Special Warfare Group but closely connected to the Prince Group. Wei Tianhang, the veteran of the military. Yi Dongxing, the god of army in Zhongzhou State. All of them were super heavyweights whose influence in the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State exceeded their positions. At that time, the academics could not see any hope of breaking the deadlock. Therefore, in the first 5 years after Li Huaqing gained a foothold, the academics teamed up with the Giant Group. Dongqing Wudi became a director of Zhongzhou State and officially controlled the army headquarters. He clearly ranked third among the directors. After the election, he became the number 2 figure in Zhongzhou State. The academics undoubtedly hoped to unite the Prince Group to check and balance the strong influence of the Southeast and the Prince Group in the army headquarters. From the looks of it, this was a good move. In the past 5 years, most of the attention of the two groups in the army had been drawn by Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi, the god of massacre of Zhongzhou State, had been a marshal with real power for 20 years. Both internally and externally, he was tough and domineering, which made the Prince and the Southeast Group miserable. And the academics also took advantage of this opportunity to expand their influence in the army headquarters. But all this was obviously not enough. The academics hoped to further strengthen their influence on the army headquarters with Li Huaqing's re-election. This was a very reasonable request. But it was not a request that Dongqing Wudi was willing to accept. The focus was on the Border Control Corps. As the super-large comprehensive corps with the strongest combat capability in Zhongzhou State, the Border Control Corps could be said to be the unique flag of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State. Its importance was far greater than that of several major theaters of operations. If they could get the leadership of the Border Control Corps, the academics would undoubtedly rise strongly in the army headquarters. But Dongqing Wudi did not mean to give in at all. A few years ago, the position of commander of the Border Control Corps finally fell to Di Jiang of the Wang family of Beihai, and a lot of deals were made in secret. After Di Jiang resigned, Dongqing Wudi continued to hold the position of commander of the Border Control Corps. The word, concurrently, was destined not to last long. After this election, Dongqing Wudi was still the executive minister of the army headquarters, but he had no reason to hold the position of commander of the Border Control Corps. Otherwise, the whole world would think that there was no one available in the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State. And this position was currently the focus of the Giant Group, the Southeast Group, and the academics. It was not as simple as a member of parliament or a marshal with real power. Its significance could not be overemphasized. Does he still want the Eagle King of the Li family to control the Border Control Corps? Hua Xingyang's voice was a little gloomy. That's not it. Li Huaqing shook his head. The matter of Sky Eagle was mentioned once. Since he didn't agree at that time, it's unlikely to be him in the future. But when it comes to candidates, Minister Dongqing has too many candidates in his hands. The strength of the commander of the Border Control Corps was not the most important. The most important thing was prestige and fighting mind. Any commander of the several armies of the Border Control Corps was barely qualified to compete for that position. They were all Dongqing Wudi's direct subordinates. And Beihai also hoped that Yi Dongxing could concurrently serve as the commander of the Border Control Corps as the deputy minister and become a director. Needless to say, we have been fighting openly and secretly for several years. Until now, we can only take one step at a time. I'm afraid we can't really decide on the candidate until the eve of the election. We still have a chance, right? Hua Xingyang's voice was a little eager. Of course. Li Huaqing smiled. When he was about to continue to say something, the confidential phone on his desk suddenly rang. Li Huaqing raised his eyebrows slightly, picked up the phone, and said hello. Hua Xingyang didn't hear the voice on the other end of the phone clearly. He could only hear the other party's voice saying something in a hurry. Li Huaqing's face changed. He continued to listen attentively and made a sound of from time to time. It took about 5 minutes for a phone call. Li Huaqing silently put down the phone and pondered for a long time. Hua Xingyang wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, he suppressed his curiosity and said nothing. Li Huaqing glanced at him and said in a low voice, "It's about Tianlan, Gu Xingyun, and Jiang Shangyu. Hey, I'm afraid it's really difficult this time." What's wrong? Hua Xingyang's heart tightened slightly. In the current Zhongzhou state, anything about Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace needed to be treated with caution. Just like the Wang family of Beihai before. Anything about Wang Tianzong needed to be treated with caution. What Li Tianlan said more than 2 years ago had really become a reality today. For Zhongzhou state, he was the overall situation of Zhongzhou state. Li Huaqing let out a long breath, reached for a cigarette, took out one, lit it, and took a big drag. After smoking nearly half of the cigarette, he waved the smoke in front of him away and said in a low voice, after Li Tianlan left Yuzhou, he went to Tiannan and was besieged by Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, and Li Guangtu. The battle is now over. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun are seriously injured, and Li Guangtu is captured by Li Tianlan. According to the time, Li Guangtu should be in Emperor Dong's palace now. Hua Xingyang was stunned and his face changed dramatically. Li Guangtu? Gu Xingyun? He was agitated, his voice was high and low, and his face was full of disbelief. It's incredible, right? Li Huaqing smiled bitterly and rubbed his forehead. But this is the truth. 3 against 1, not only did they not win, but they also lost miserably. Even Li Guangtu was captured. Fortunately, Jiang Shangyu ran fast. Otherwise, if all 3 fell into Li Tianlan's hands, things would be more difficult. Hua Xingyang was obviously still immersed in the names of Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun. How could they join hands? It doesn't matter. Li Huaqing said lightly, if we really want to find out the reason, it's probably because of pressure. We all attended Senior Li's funeral. The relationship between Li Guangtu and Li Tianlan is a little tense. The former doesn't recognize the current Emperor Dong's palace, but there is no doubt that both of them want the leadership of the Li family. According to the current situation, how can the Purgatory of Heaven capital have a chance? The strength of the Purgatory of Heaven capital is still there. Hua Xingyang said subconsciously, and then shook his head. But many of them seem to have left in the past 2 years and joined Emperor Dong's palace. That's what happened. And do you really think that those who stay in the Purgatory of Heaven capital are willing to die for Li Guangtu? It's impossible. Not counting those who have left, those who still stay in the Purgatory of Heaven capital must also be swaying between Li Guangtu and Li Tianlan. These people's attitudes toward the outside world are unquestionable. But in their hearts, Emperor Dong's palace is the same as inside, and they can't do it. In this case, if Emperor Dong's palace really goes to war with the Purgatory of Heaven capital, it's good enough that 1/3 of them are willing to die for the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Huaqing shook his head. Hua Xingyang didn't speak for a while, but he had no doubt about Li Huaqing's speculation. Or it was not speculation at all, but a fact. If Emperor Dong's palace had just started and was still called East Emperor Palace, perhaps there would be more people standing in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. But East Emperor Palace had become Emperor Dong's palace. What was Emperor Dong's palace like now? A truly invincible palace master. 3 deputy palace masters of the invincible realm. Nearly 20 experts of the half-step invincible realm and the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Dozens of experts of the thunder-shocking realm. At present, such a lineup could not be said to be worse than other forces. This kind of lineup was unique in the entire Dark World. The current Emperor Dong's palace was the strongest. If only the high-end combat capability of the thunder-shocking realm was counted, the current Emperor Dong's palace was not worse than the Wang family of Beihai at its peak a few years ago. The only uncertainty was whether the current Li Tianlan or Wang Tianzong in Mormons was stronger. But anyway, such Emperor Dong's palace had crushed the purgatory of heaven capital in all aspects. No matter from which aspect, Emperor Dong's palace was superior. In this way, even if a large number of the elders of the Li family stayed in the purgatory of heaven capital, it was hard to say which side they were on. Li Tianlan, Huajiang was silent for a while and whispered, "I suddenly agree with the Prime Minister's point of view." The Prime Minister he mentioned was naturally Qin Fangqing, whose funeral was over. "It's too late." Li Huaqing sighed slightly. Now he also had this kind of emotion. This emotion was not directed at Li Tianlan. It was an instinctive fear of a behemoth that was almost out of control from his own standpoint. Not to mention that Li Tianlan had developed to this extent. From Li Huaqing's standpoint, even if his own son had developed to this extent, he would also worry and fear. "What should we do now?" Hua Jingyang asked. "Prepare the car." Li Huaqing's voice was low. "We'll be busy tonight." He paused. "Go to the Interstellar Research Institute and see how the meeting is going." Hua Jingyang nodded silently. The Interstellar Research Institute was a branch of the Zhongzhou State Academy of Sciences, which gathered all the most famous astrophysicists in Zhongzhou State. It could be said to be the astrophysics authority in Zhongzhou State. The blue moon a few hours ago had already shocked the world. As soon as the blue moon disappeared, countries such as Star State, Snow Country, England, France, Germany, East Island, Bansi, and Italos had contacted Zhongzhou State immediately. As the most powerful country in the world in terms of comprehensive strength, Zhongzhou State had surpassed Star State and Snow Country in the development of astronomy in the past 100 years. The NOAR-1 interstellar probe launched by Zhongzhou State 50 years ago was about to leave the Kuiper belt of the solar system. It had landed on the moon several times and gained a lot of results. After the Blue Moon incident, all countries began to communicate with Zhongzhou State. In today's Interstellar Research Institute, the astrophysics experts of Zhongzhou State had held several hours of video conferences with the elites of various countries, putting forward various theories to explore some truths that might exist behind the blue moon. In fact, ordinary people might scoff at extraterrestrial civilization, or be skeptical, or believe it deeply. But no matter what their attitude was, there were very few people who had really seen extraterrestrial civilization, or they were bragging about something that didn't exist at all. But when it came to specific countries, any country would have some confidential information. They had never really seen extraterrestrial civilization. But in the Interstellar Research Institute, well, to be exact, in the exploration of the solar system, every superpower had some bits and pieces of information. Led by Zhongzhou State and Star State, their research on the moon was quite in-depth. In several lunar explorations, they found some mysterious metal wreckage and saw the vague ruins near the pyramids on the moon. At the same time, a lot of information proved one fact. That was, the moon shouldn't exist. There were also many ancient documents that recorded that a long, long time ago, there was no moon in the sky above the Earth. These ancient documents didn't refer to Zhongzhou State. Instead, there were similar records in the ancient documents found all over the world. For example, the mysterious and ancient Mayan civilization that did exist. In the chronicles of the Mayans, there were descriptions of Mars and Venus, but there was no record of the moon. In the classic of mountains and seas of Zhongzhou State, the first description of the moon appeared after Emperor Shenyuan. There were too many similar records in too many documents. All the signs seemed to show that the moon suddenly appeared out of thin air one day in the ancient and long time ago. No one knew how long this period of time was, but based on all the signs, if the moon suddenly appeared out of thin air, it should have been more than 10,000 years ago. As for the origin of the moon, there was no accurate statement in the scientific community. There were only various hypotheses. But this time, the time of the blue moon once again aroused the enthusiasm or uneasiness of all countries about the moon. After the blue moon, several of the most powerful countries in the world almost gathered together and began to discuss. Let's see the results of their discussion first. If necessary, we can share some confidential information. Of course, we need other countries to exchange confidential information. Since it's a discussion, we must be frank, especially Star State. You keep an eye on this. Li Huaqing continued. Hua Xingyang nodded and looked at Li Huaqing. What about you? I'm going to find Guo Wendian, and then to see Dongqing Wudi. Li Huaqing shook his head. The natural disasters that may happen are never as terrible as the man-made disasters that may happen. I want Zhongzhou State to be stable. Zhongzhou State must also be stable. Hua Xingyang was silent for a while, then nodded and said, I see. He knew very well what Li Huaqing meant. Li Huaqing wanted stability, and Emperor Dong's palace was now the source of instability. But from the standpoint of Emperor Dong's palace, they did nothing wrong at all. The so-called source of instability was just some situation that the parliament made up because it was afraid of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huaqing wanted to balance the power of Emperor Dong's palace. This also meant that he needed to create an opponent for Emperor Dong's palace. Such an opponent could be weaker than Emperor Dong's palace, but it was necessary. Gu Xingyun was not important, but it was an option. Jiang Shangyu was not important, but it was also an option. Li Kuangtu and Purgatory of Heaven Capital were not important, but they were also options. When the three of them joined forces, this choice seemed to be very reliable. So Li Huaqing planned to ask Li Tianlan for Gu Xingyun. But now Li Tianlan was not the Li Tianlan a few years ago. As the superpower with the strongest combat capability in the Dark World, the young East Emperor was in charge of Shenyuan City, and he was really invincible in the world. Even if it was Li Huaqing, he wouldn't be able to get someone from his hands so easily. Especially in yesterday's meeting, Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan did not get along very well. The abrupt exposure of the Phoenix Pavilion had caused a stir within the parliament. Everyone had a complicated feeling. It turned out that during the more than 20 years when Gu Xingyun was the war god of Zhongzhou State, he did a lot of outrageous things secretly, and some of them even hurt the interests of many people to a certain extent. For example, the Li family was the biggest victim. The treason case of the Li family more than 20 years ago was likely a conspiracy initiated by the Gu family or a blatant frame-up. If this matter was made public, how much of a stir would it cause in Zhongzhou State? Li Tianlan entered the secular world at the beginning, perhaps for this day. Gu Xianyan had enough evidence in her hands. As long as she was willing to say it, every word she said could cause a huge stir in Zhongzhou State. It was also because of this that Li Huaqing felt incredible about the cooperation between Gu Xingyun and Li Kuangtu. He did not let Gu Xianyan give more evidence at the meeting, which had caused great dissatisfaction in Li Tianlan. What he did might be for the good of Zhongzhou State, but from another perspective, it was equivalent to Li Huaqing had expressed his attitude towards the treason case. The treason case had always been an unsolved case in Zhongzhou State. It was complicated and confusing, and no one had really said anything. But Li Huaqing's attitude was very obvious. Whether the treason case was true or not, he did not want anyone to mention it again. This also meant that he did not allow anyone to mention what had happened to the Li family for more than 20 years. It could be imagined how strong the dissatisfaction in Li Tianlan's heart was. Under such circumstances, Li Tianlan caught Li Kuangtu. Li Huaqing also decided to ask Li Tianlan for Li Kuangtu. Although Hua Xingyang stood on the standpoint of the academics, if he put himself in Li Tianlan's shoes, he would feel that Li Huaqing had gone too far. Li Tianlan really took him as a doe with no temper and could do whatever he wanted. Li Tianlan was young and aggressive. If he really acted impulsively and completely fell out with Li Huaqing, it was likely that there would be a situation in which he and Zhongzhou State would regret it. It was impossible for Li Huaqing not to think of this. So he had to visit Guo Wenyan and Dong Qingwudi overnight. He had to reach a consensus with Guo Wenyan to put pressure on Emperor Dong's palace. He also had to reach a consensus with Dong Qingwudi to give Emperor Dong's palace huge compensation. The compensation this time was likely to be a big loss, saving Li Guangtu and making up for what had happened to the Li family for many years. Such compensation was completely unimaginable. At the very least, the border control corps that several groups had been fighting for should be gone. Hua Jingyang sighed, shook his head, and walked out of the office. Li Huaqing sat in the office, smoked a cigarette silently, and opened the office door. Outside the office, Ma Si, the secretary who was sorting out the materials, stood up immediately. Get off work. Before she could speak, Li Huaqing had waved his hand. It's very late today. I'll go to Wentian's place. You don't have to follow me. Ma Si smiled and nodded. By the way, Li Huaqing suddenly said, is Minister Dongqing in the Hidden Dragon Sea tonight? As one of the directors of Zhongzhou State, Dong Qingwudi naturally had his own residence in the Hidden Dragon Sea, but he occasionally lived in the Bai family's manor. Yes. Ma Si nodded. Something happened in Liaodong. Speaker Bai rushed back to deal with it. Minister Dongqing came back here in the evening. Li Huaqing nodded and said, He went out of the door and walked slowly to Guo Wentian's residence. It was already late at night, but many people in the world had not slept at this time. 3 masters besieged Li Tianlan and failed miserably. Was this the same thing? These were 2 completely different things. The first was the cooperation between Gu Xingyun and Li Guangtu. The second was Li Tianlan's unparalleled strength. All the people who knew what this meant would find it hard to rest at this time. This must include Guo Wentian. Guo Wenyan was meeting a guest. To be exact, he was video chatting with someone. When the secretary respectfully opened the office door, Li Huaqing saw Guo Wenyan, with a serious and livid face, pacing back and forth in the office at first glance. A somewhat familiar voice with a trace of electric current sounded in the office. That's about it. Fortunately, things can still be controlled. We can make a deep review to the parliament and dissolve the Phoenix Pavilion, but... The voice paused. Obviously, he had seen Li Huaqing coming in. Guo Wenyan nodded to Li Huaqing, took a deep breath, and forced himself to calm down. Li Huaqing looked around the office. There was a huge screen that had been temporarily set up in the office. On the screen, Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun, with pale faces, were together. Before Li Huaqing came in, they were discussing the Phoenix Pavilion. Li Huaqing's expression was calm, and there was no emotion in his voice. Where are you? We're safe now, Jiang Shangyu said in a low voice. The picture on the screen flickered from time to time, and the sound of electric current was very obvious. Obviously, the signal on the other side was extremely poor, and the communication might be interrupted at any time. Li Huaqing didn't talk nonsense. He looked at Gu Xingyun, narrowed his eyes, and said in a cold voice, "What are you going to do about the Phoenix Pavilion?" Gu Xingyun's face was obviously distorted. Obviously, he still couldn't bear the sudden exposure of the secret agency that he had carefully cultivated for decades. Thinking of Gu Xianyan, the disciple he had cultivated with all his strength, Gu Xingyun clenched his fists tightly. "I can provide a list of all the people in the Phoenix Pavilion, but it doesn't make much sense," Gu Xingyun said in a hoarse voice. "We'll talk about this when you come back. You know your current situation and we are now." The picture on the screen suddenly flickered, and then it was completely black. Li Huaqing's voice stopped. "The signal over there is too bad." Guo Wentian let out a long breath. "This is the 3rd time." Li Huaqing was silent for a while and asked, "What do they think?" Guo Wentian sighed and rubbed his face with a bitter smile. During this period of time, it was really eventful. Every day, he was mentally and physically exhausted. Jiang Shangyu's meaning is very obvious. He wants us to put pressure on Emperor Dong's palace and get Li Guangtu back. Before you came, we had talked a lot. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Kunlun City, and Jiang Shangyu intend to merge into a new force to fight against Emperor Dong's palace. To be honest, I agree with this proposal. No matter from which perspective, Emperor Dong's palace has now reached the point where it must be contained. If it continues to develop, it is even more threatening than the Wang family of Beihai. Li Tianlan is too young. In his early 20s, he has at least a few decades to develop. During this period, if Emperor Dong's palace does not contain them, their development is simply unimaginable. I think it's time to put some pressure on Li Tianlan. It's not enough to just put pressure on him. Li Huaqing shook his head. Zhongzhou State can accommodate Emperor Dong's palace. At the end of the day, from our standpoint, we just don't want an absolutely invincible force. What I want has always been very clear: balance, not extinction. As long as Emperor Dong's palace develops within a controllable range, it will be of great benefit to Zhongzhou State. Because of Li Tianlan's existence, Zhongzhou State may even completely unify the Dark World in the next few decades. I don't need to tell you the significance of this. You know very well. So, Guo Wentian asked with a straight face. Appropriate compensation is necessary. Li Huaqing said. Guo Wentian sneered. Is compensation really appropriate? Li Huaqing sat on the sofa, lit a cigarette, and said quietly, in fact, I'm not afraid of Emperor Dong's palace demanding an exorbitant price. I'm afraid that he won't ask. Zhongzhou State is indeed very strong, but you and the Prime Minister have some misunderstandings when you were alive. First, you seem to be very firm that as long as Zhongzhou State can make up its mind, it can kill Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai. Second, you seem to think that without Zhongzhou State, Emperor Dong's palace can't survive. Similarly, you haven't considered who will replace Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai without them. Zhongzhou State has the strength to destroy Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai, but what happens after that? Any force, as long as it has enough strength, development is inevitable. If we destroy the current Li Tianlan, there will be a second Li Tianlan sooner or later. If he can't develop to this extent, it can only mean that he doesn't have the potential as the current Li Tianlan. We want a super expert who can unify the Dark World, but we also want him to be absolutely loyal to us. This is impossible. When an individual is strong enough, how can he have absolute loyalty to the group? You have always wanted to suppress Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai by force, putting pressure and constantly restricting them, but is it really meaningful? If you really push them into a desperate situation, you've seen Wang Shengxiao's counterattack. Now, facing the Beihai Corps that has expanded to 500,000 people and is still recruiting, what do you think? Guo Wentian frowned. We are talking about Emperor Dong's palace now. There's nothing different. Li Huaqing said blandly, it's true that Emperor Dong's palace doesn't have a legion of hundreds of thousands of people, but they also don't have a base that has been operating for hundreds of years. So, Li Tianlan is more likely to go to extremes. If we really push him into a corner, he will completely turn against us. Believe it or not, big countries like Star State and Snow Country will cry and beg Li Tianlan to join them. As long as Li Tianlan is willing, those people will kneel down to welcome him without any hesitation. What Zhongzhou State can give Li Tianlan, Star State can also give, or even more. That's treason. Guo Wentian looked angry. Li Tianlan once said a sentence in the chaos of Snow Country. Li Huaqing said softly, if Zhongzhou State doesn't betray me, I won't betray Zhongzhou State. Nothing is taken for granted. You can ask Li Tianlan to do anything, but Li Tianlan can also ask Zhongzhou State to do anything. This is the rule, a matter of principle. In the name of keeping an eye on the overall situation, you endlessly oppress a person and tell him that the overall situation is the most important, which is beyond the principle. Let's imagine if things really develop to this point, and Li Tianlan turns against us, what will the situation be? Guo Wentian's face was livid, and he said nothing. If Li Tianlan really betrayed the country and went to other countries with the core team of Emperor Dong's palace, there are still many people he cares about here, and some people he can't take away, such as Dong Qingwudi. As long as he dares to leave, Dong Qingwudi's end is completely imaginable. Guo Wentian gritted his teeth. What a coincidence. As long as he is driven away, we can also imagine the end of you, me, and everyone in Zhongzhou State. If Li Tianlan insists on killing you, who in the world can stop him? Li Huaqing seemed to be so angry that he laughed. Guo Wenyin trembled all over, and after a long while, he snorted coldly. I'm not here to fight with you today. Li Huaqing waved his hand and said, I'm not here to listen to your complaints. Things have happened. Now we really need to set up an opponent for Emperor Dong's palace, so that they won't go astray, so pressure is necessary. It's necessary to get Li Kuang to back. But compensation is also necessary. Let's reach an agreement first, and then I can communicate with Dongqing Wudi and talk to Li Tianlan through Dongqing Wudi. It's more euphemistic, and the other party will accept it more easily. It sounds like begging him. Guo Wenyin gritted his teeth. We can order him, but we have to deal with it separately. Just from this matter, this is the internal affairs of the Li family, and our request, in his opinion, is a little too much. Li Huaqing was calm. Guo Wenyin looked at him in a daze. After a long while, he suddenly gritted his teeth and said, Then what do you want to give him? You shouldn't think so. Li Huaqing looked up at him and said, It should be, what should we give him to make him willing to let him go? In other words, there is something that we can take out to exchange with him. The night of Wulan State, shrouded in the polar night, seemed to reveal a bottomless depth. Snowflakes fluttered in the air and fell in the crisscrossing lights in the station of the Snowdance Corps. Thousands of elites of the Snowdance Corps were still stabilizing the situation in the dark nights. There were still nearly 10,000 elites here, silently holding on. When Fireman came to the office of the deputy commander, the secretary was coming from the corner of the stairs with a large lunchbox. The edge of the lunchbox was steaming, which made people feel very kind and warm. Seeing Fireman, the secretary was stunned and subconsciously raised his hand to salute. What's delicious? An extra meal for Eagle tonight? Fireman smiled and asked casually. A few small stir-frying dishes and 2 pounds of rice. The general has been busy since the morning and just has some free time. The secretary smiled. Give it to me. Fireman took the lunchbox and waved his hand. Go and do your work. The secretary hesitated, nodded, and returned to his seat. He was originally a grassroots officer of the Thunderbolt Corps. After coming to the Snowdance Corps, he coincidentally became Li Tianying's secretary. He didn't know much about the Li family, but he knew that Fireman had a good relationship with his boss last time. Both of them were from the Li family. Occasionally, when they were free, they would sit together and reminisce about the past. Unfortunately, they couldn't drink in the army station, which made Li Tianying feel a little regretful. Fireman knocked on the door of the deputy commander's office. Before waiting for a response, he pushed the door open and went in. Li Tianying was sitting on the sofa in the office and watching the news of Wulan State. He looked serious. When he saw Fireman, he froze for a moment and then laughed. My treatment as the deputy commander is a little high. I let the senior combat staff officer of the army be my secretary. This standard, good guy, I'm flattering the leader in advance so that you won't make things difficult for me in the future. Fireman snorted coldly, put the lunchbox on the table and opened it. There was only one bowl and chopsticks in it. He didn't bother to say more, so he picked up the bowl and took a bite. With your behavior, I'll make things difficult for you in the future. Li Tianying laughed and took another bowl and chopsticks to enjoy dinner. The parliament fully respected Dongqing Wudi's opinion on the affairs of the Zhongzhou State Corps in Europe. They all knew that this was Li Tianlan's territory. Therefore, from beginning to end, the other major groups, even the Prince Group, had not expressed any views on the personnel here. Cheng Huaining, the highest officer of the Corps in Europe, had been here for several years. It was time to move. Dongqing Wudi relied on him very much, and his transfer would be put forward in the near future. Taking advantage of the precarious time of the Special Warfare Group, Dongqing Wudi hoped to completely eliminate the influence left by his predecessor, Qi Beizong. Therefore, Cheng Huaining should be transferred back to Yuzhou, promoted by 1 rank, to take over by Qing Zhao's current position, or to take over the position left by Yi Dongxing. The highest officer of the Corps in Europe was Li Tianying. As one of the strongest veterans left by the Li family, Li Tianying was undoubtedly a half-step invincible realm expert, and he was at the top level. Without enough strength, Zhongzhou State would not have used his name as the designation of a special force decades ago. He was originally a candidate pushed by Dongqing Wudi to compete for the commander of the Border Control Corps. Now the conditions were not ripe, so it was not a bad thing to stay in Europe for a while. Although Fireman was in the fire-flaming realm, his strength was no worse than Li Tianing's. After Li Tianing took control of the European garrison, Fireman would become the new commander of the Snowdance Corps. Of course, it was also possible that Li Tianing would concurrently serve as the commander of the Snowdance Corps, and Fireman would become the deputy commander, just like the relationship between Qing Huaining and Li Tianing. But no matter what the position was, Fireman would be the leader of the Snowdance Corps in the future. And this place would gradually become a gathering place for the veterans of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace. "You look in a good mood?" Fireman asked thoughtfully while eating, looking at his old friend with a smile on the corner of his mouth. Li Tianing was puzzled. "I've been in a good mood. Do you mean something?" Fireman didn't speak for a while. "I knew you wouldn't look for me if you had nothing to do. Tell me, what's going on?" Li Tianing picked up a piece of fried meat with chili with his chopsticks and ate until sweat came out of the tip of his nose. "You should have received the news, right?" Fireman asked calmly. Li Tianing's movements paused slightly. After a long while, he said slowly, "It's about the young master?" "Which young master?" Fireman asked directly in a very direct tone. "Young master." It was a very interesting title. Li Tianing and Fireman were both in their 60s, older than Li Guangtu and Li Tianlun. Both of them used to follow Li Honghe, especially Fireman, who was one of the sacred guards around Li Honghe. After Li Guangtu broke through to the invincible realm, Fireman followed Li Guangtu and became the sacred guard around him. From the perspective of the two of them, starting from Li Honghe, Li Tianlun was undoubtedly the young master, and Li Guangtu could also be regarded as the original young master. Li Tianing put down his bowl and chopsticks and looked at Fireman silently. After a few minutes, he said lightly, "What do you mean?" Fireman smiled and asked the question he had just asked. "You should have received the news too, right?" Li Tianing frowned and was a little impatient. "What do you want to say?" "I don't know." Fireman shook his head. "I'm at a loss. I don't know what to say. I always feel uncomfortable." Li Tianing suddenly smiled and picked up the bowl and chopsticks again. "You see, I'm in a good mood now. Yes, I'm envious to see you like this." Fireman whispered. "Because I never think so much. One thing I know is that I'm a member of the Li family. More than 30 years ago, when I was on a mission in Heng State, if it hadn't been for Senior Li, I would have been torn to pieces and buried in a foreign country. From that day on, I told myself that I was a member of the Li family. The Li family is good at any time. I've experienced the peak of the Li family's power. I've also followed Senior Li to live in the border incognito for many years. I've experienced all the ups and downs. No matter what kind of Li family it is, the Li family is good. I like staying in the Li family and have never thought about leaving, so why think so much?" Li Tianing said carelessly. Fireman frowned and said in a deep voice, "Thinking too much doesn't mean you want to leave the Li family. If you don't want to leave, why think so much?" Li Tianing's voice was a little cold. Before Senior Li died, he made it clear that Tianlun was the heir of the Li family. This is Senior Li's will. I don't care about the rest. But anyone who doesn't recognize Senior Li's will, no matter who he is my enemy, the kind that will fight to the death. "So you're indifferent to Tianlun's arrest of Guangtu?" Fireman's voice was a little complicated. Li Tianing was silent for a while and said lightly, "I've never liked Guangtu very much. He was like this in the past. Everything was carried to the extreme. Such a person may succeed in everything, but once he fails once, it will be difficult for him to turn over. It turns out that my view is correct. A large part of the reason why he has what he has today is because of his character. I don't like him and I don't recognize him. The real heir of the Li family is not him, so why should I care? Even if Tianlun kills him?" Fireman asked abruptly. Li Tianing was slightly stunned. He stopped in place with his chopsticks and frowned without saying a word. He put down his bowl and chopsticks. If Tianlon really wanted to kill him, he wouldn't have taken him back to Emperor Dong's palace. You should know this very well. Indeed. Fireman nodded. But just in case. He's not dead now, but who can predict the next development? If Tianlon is impulsive, then kill him. If he's dead, he's dead. Li Tianying suddenly said. Fireman looked up at Li Tianying in astonishment. Li Tianying smiled, but his smile was a little cold. He asked the same question that Fireman had asked. You should have received the news, right? Fireman frowned slightly. Don't you think this news is very interesting? Li Tianying asked. The news should have been released by Jiang Shangyu. Fireman frowned and said in a deep voice, this news, well, first, it is told to the Zhongzhou State Parliament. After the parliament knows about this, it will definitely take action. Tianlon is too strong in Zhongzhou State now, and they need a candidate who can balance Tianlon. Second, it is to tell us, the elders of the Li family, that they hope we can put pressure on Tianlon. Fireman twitched the corner of his mouth. There should be a purpose to stimulate Tianlon. If Tianlon impulsively kills Quangt, not only Zhongzhou State will be disappointed, but also we will be disappointed. Then maybe a lot of stories will happen. I'm not disappointed at all. Li Tianying suddenly said. Fireman frowned. I mean, Li Tianying looked at Fireman, don't you think this news is very interesting? Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun joined forces. He stared into Fireman's eyes. Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun joined forces. Fireman. Joined forces? Li Tianying laughed, but his eyes were extremely cold. After the treason case, Senior Li gathered all the forces that could be gathered in a short time and took us to the border. Do you know the exact number of people at that time? I know. Li Tianying pointed at his chest. 1,983. 20 years. In the past 20 years, 133 people in the Li family died of natural causes. By natural causes, I mean because of illness, old injuries, and internal injuries, and because there was no condition to treat them. At that time, we didn't even have a bottle of penicillin in the camp. Fireman. In the past 20 years, more than 800 brothers have gone to the purgatory of heaven capital by stealing the sky and replacing the sun. When young master left the border for Huading a few years ago, there were more than 100 brothers in the border camp. Fireman. Li Tianying's voice was calm. It was calm to the extreme, which was a kind of hysterical madness. Tell me, where are the others? Fireman had nothing to say. Do you think Kunlun City will let us go when we get to the border? Cut the weeds and get rid of the roots. Those brothers who really died are the best answer. For more than 20 years, I like the so-called hard life we've lived, and I'm King willing. I think it's good to live like this. But except for myself and my brothers who share weal and woe with me, no one else is qualified to tell me that it's good to live like this. It's all because of Gu Xingyun, Kunlun City, and Li Guangtu himself. I don't blame him. None of us hates Li Guangtu. Until today. And now, what do I hear? Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun have joined forces. Tianlon left the border to restore the glory of the Li family, to avenge Li Guangtu, to destroy Kunlun City, and to return everything that our Li family has suffered for more than 20 years. And now, Li Guangtu, the initiator of everything, has joined forces with Gu Xingyun. He is targeting the people of the Li family, the heir designated by Senior Li, the person who wants to avenge him, and the person who wants to get back all the honor he has lost. Fuck joining forces. Bang. Crush. Li Tianying directly overturned the table in front of him. Vegetables, rice, meat, bowls, chopsticks, lunchboxes, and everything hit the wall, making a loud noise. What we've suffered for more than 20 years. What about those brothers who are really buried at the border? What about your years in the desert prison? He joined forces with Gu Xingyun. What the hell is this? When he joined forces with Gu Xingyun, did he ever think about the brothers who were standing behind him in the purgatory of heaven capital? Did he ever think about what happened to us at the border? Did he ever think about his father and his family, who once stood at the peak of Zhongzhou State, but because of him he was reduced to struggling at the border? Oh, maybe he thought about it. I think he thought about it. Then, on behalf of the Li family, on behalf of Senior Li, on behalf of each of us, dead and alive, on behalf of all the Li family, he told Gu Xingyun, I forgive you on behalf of the Li family. I forgive you for what you have done. Let's go and deal with Li Tianlan. Does he deserve it? Disloyal, unfilial, and unjust. Will I be disappointed if Tianlan kills him? I won't be disappointed. I'm going to have a good celebration. In the hasty knock on the door, the secretary, who heard the noise, directly pushed open the office door. Li Tianning waved his hand and said, It's okay. Order another meal. I'll celebrate. The corner of Fireman's mouth twitched awkwardly. The awkwardness was expressed in his whole body. He couldn't say that he could understand Li Tianning's mood, because he didn't really empathize. What he remembered was all the good times when he was by Li Guangtu's side, that friendship. Li Tianning remembered everything he had suffered at the border. Friendship? The moment he heard that Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun had joined forces, the so-called friendship seemed to have completely disappeared. Looking at Li Tianning's excited expression, Fireman sighed deeply. He had every reason to believe that after learning that Li Guangtu had joined forces with Gu Xingyun, Li Tianning was definitely not the only one who had given up on Li Guangtu. More veterans of the Li family would have this idea. Give up? Or this was not giving up at all. Because from the moment Li Guangtu joined forces with Gu Xingyun, he seemed to have given up his identity as a member of the Li family and the grievances between the Li family and Kunlun City. And this was what the Li family had insisted on for many years until now. Chapter 1194. When Li Huaqing arrived in front of the general hall, he saw Dongqing Wudi's secretary, Lin Guoqiang, hurriedly trotting over from another direction, carrying a greasy paper bag in his hand. The two met in front of the general hall. Lin Guoqiang froze and saluted subconsciously. Before he could speak, Li Huaqing had already laughed. He pointed to the paper bag in Lin Guoqiang's hand and said with a smile, What treasure? Lin Guoqiang grinned and said, General Han Bing came to Yuzhou for a meeting and brought some spiced beef from my hometown for the minister. The minister is happy tonight and wants to drink some. Shi Han Bing, the commander of the Pegasus Army of the Border Control Corps. Li Huaqing nodded slightly, his eyes twinkling. 5 years ago, Dongqing Wudi entered the army headquarters, and the status of the Border Control Corps naturally rose. Thunder God of the Blood Battalion was not moved for the time being, but Pegasus, Huang Sha, and the new commander of the Thunderbolt Battalion were all promoted. After Dongqing Wudi left, Shi Han Bing could be said to be the most murderous general in the Border Control Corps, and also a world-famous general of wisdom. He was once called the brain and military counselor of the Border Control Corps together with Cheng Huaining. After the recommendation of Li Tianning as the commander of the Border Control Corps was rejected by the parliament, Shi Han Bing was undoubtedly a strong contender for this position. Li Huaqing shook his head subconsciously. The problem of the commander of the Border Control Corps had been lingering. The biggest problem was that Dongqing Wudi had too many bargaining chips in his hands. As the commander of the Border Control Corps for more than 20 years, Dongqing Wudi's prestige was like the sun at high noon in the entire army headquarters. For more than 20 years, Li Huaqing couldn't even count how many senior commanders had come out of the Border Control Corps. It was worthy of being the richest family in the army headquarters, and its influence was still above the Southeast Group and the Prince Group. It was almost impossible for other groups to compete for the position of the commander of the Border Control Corps. Li Tianning could be rejected. Dongqing Wudi could also reject the candidates proposed by other groups. The result of such mutual rejection was almost predictable, so no one would ask for this position for the time being without the right opportunity. Dongqing Wudi could only hold it. Dongqing Wudi also didn't mention Shi Han Bing for the time being. And Li Huaqing knew that even if Dongqing Wudi's recommendation of Shi Han Bing was rejected again, he still had other qualified candidates in his hands to take this position. Even if he rejected them, he still had candidates to recommend. This was Dongqing Wudi's biggest bargaining chip and confidence in Zhongzhou state. The others could only be envious or jealous. There was nothing they could do. The best thing to do now was to bide his time and wait for an opportunity. The university, the Southeast, and even the Prince Group were all waiting in silence. The rise of new groups impacted the pattern of Zhongzhou state. The general election was approaching. The compromise and competition, both overt and covert, had reached a white-hot level. Swords and knives were everywhere. They were all waiting for the new group to make mistakes. Even if he didn't make any mistakes, he hoped to see the new group encounter some difficult situations, and then exchange interests for the position of Commander-in-Chief of the Border Control Corps in his hands. Li Huaqing silently pondered for a moment. Suddenly he was startled. The instant his eyes focused, he saw that Lin Guoqiang was also looking at him with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Li Huaqing's eyes narrowed slightly for a moment, and his smile became more obvious. "I'm also a little hungry, and I happen to have something to communicate with Wudi. Let's go together." Lin Guoqiang, who didn't show any abnormality, respectfully led Li Huaqing into the general palace. This was the place where Dongqing Wudi usually worked and lived in the hidden Dragon Sea. It was called Iron and Blood in the period of Qi Beizong. After Dongqing Wudi came, it was renamed General. There were 2 courtyards, the front yard for work and the backyard for living. However, because of his origin, this was also the most deserted building in the hidden Dragon Sea. For work, Dongqing Wudi preferred to go to the army headquarters building. In terms of living, Dongqing Wudi was often dragged to the Bai family's manor by Qingzhao. So when the giants who walked in the hidden Dragon Sea occasionally saw Dongqing Wudi in their spare time, they would joke that it was not easy to see him here. The color in the office area of the General Palace was a solemn and somewhat gloomy pure black, which was in sharp contrast with the ruddy face of Dongqing Wudi. "What are you so happy about?" Li Huaqing asked with a smile. "You know." Dongqing Wudi grinned. Li Huaqing didn't say anything for half a minute. He and Dongqing Wudi had known each other for many years, but he really didn't find that the god of massacre could be so playful. The corners of Li Huaqing's mouth twitched awkwardly. He looked at Dongqing Wudi, who opened the paper bag of spiced beef, and said casually, "About Tunlon?" Dongqing Wudi's smile paused for a moment, and then he said softly, "Yes." His eyes were in a trance for a moment, and his voice had emotions that Li Huaqing couldn't hear. "I've been waiting for this day. The Dongqing clan has been waiting for this day for many years." He had a strong desire to talk, and he didn't even care who the audience was. Or he had decided to reveal something to Li Huaqing. "Finally. Congratulations." Li Huaqing's voice was also a little complicated. He was gratified and worried. He was gratified that Zhongzhou state finally had an absolutely invincible expert in the dark world, but he was worried about the risk that Emperor Dong's palace was about to go out of control. Absolutely invincible. It was easier said than done. Throughout the hundreds of years of history since the founding of Zhongzhou state, there were very few people who could be called absolutely invincible. The first was a name that was already a little vague in the history books, but it was famous in Beihai province. Wang Kanglin, the predecessor of the Wang family of Beihai. A considerable part of the initial foundation of the Wang family of Beihai was laid by him. The second was naturally the first heavenly son after the founding of the Wang family of Beihai. The third was the first war god of Zhongzhou state and the ancestor of the Lin clan, Lin Xinyuan. Zhongzhou state changed from the guardian of the country to the war god of Zhongzhou state from him. The legend of him and the heavenly son of Beihai was still deeply rooted in people's hearts hundreds of years later. The fourth was Li Xiuxin, the ancestor of the Li family in his later years. It was because of him that the Li family existed today. The Li family started from Li Xiuxin and had produced 9 generations of war gods in a row for hundreds of years. Even though he rarely fought in his later years, he could already be considered absolutely invincible. The fifth was Wang Tianzong. Wang Tianzong couldn't even be counted as one, only half. The Sword Emperor was once invincible and ranked first on the divine list. But he still had opponents. Li Guangtu and Lin Fengting might not be his opponents, but they could still pose a threat to him. The period of Wang Tianzong's absolute invincibility was that night in Mormons. That night was long for the dark world, but it was too short for the real environment. In that state, Wang Tianzong's combat capability alone could be said to be the real peak since the founding of Zhongzhou State. Even Li Tianlan couldn't surpass him now. But everything was too short. It was directly ended by the almost eternal sword. In the era when Wang Tianzong didn't show up, Li Tianlan was already absolutely invincible in this era. Evidence? The battle that had spread throughout the dark world was enough to explain everything. Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, Li Kuangtu, the old and the new era, the three super experts who stood at the peak of the dark world, all became the background of Li Tianlan's glory. This battle meant the complete rise of Emperor Dong's palace. It also meant that this era would eventually become the era of East Emperor and the dark world of Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing sighed softly and suddenly asked, "Is Li Tianlan your son?" In the past, this was definitely a very abrupt question, even enough to be said to be earth-shattering. The giants all had their own guesses and inferences in their hearts. But Li Huaqing was the first one who really asked it in front of Dongqing Wudi. Li Huaqing stared at Dongqing Wudi closely without blinking. In the face of this question that had been hidden for more than 20 years and the great pressure brought by Li Huaqing, Dongqing Wudi just raised his eyebrows slightly and nodded calmly and naturally. Yes. The corners of his mouth rose. Under the soft light, his clear smile was like the moment when he gave the order before leading an army to battle. He was wild and unrestrained, baring his teeth and brandishing his claws. Chapter 1195. Li Huaqing looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly for a long time. He was Dongqing Wudi's son. In fact, he had this speculation for a long time, and he even quietly asked Li Honghe to confirm it. It was just that Li Honghe had been vague at the beginning, which seemed to be a clear denial. Now that he knew the truth and thought about it, the other party's answer was actually equivalent to saying nothing. Fox. Thinking of the dead old Li Huaqing subconsciously shook his head and sighed, "I really envy you." These words were definitely from the bottom of his heart. Li Tianlan was from the Dongqing clan. In this way, the richest and most powerful family in the military headquarters had more than just a successor. Li Huaqing could totally imagine how high Li Tianlan would elevate the Dongqing clan in the future. All their efforts now would be rewarded enough to make people lose their minds. How could the academics and Li Huaqing, who had been bitterly pursuing the right to speak in the military and the special warfare system, not be jealous? If Li Tianlan had not been born in the Dongqing clan but in the academics, everything they had worked so hard to plan and pursue now would be almost at their fingertips. Envy. Dongqing Wudi's flamboyant smile was a little weird, which made his expression more complicated. "Do you envy me? Shouldn't I be envious?" Li Huaqing looked at him calmly and smiled. "You're envious of me because you know the outcome." Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then twitched the corner of his mouth. "At that time, we didn't know it would be like this." "I envy you, huh?" Dongqing Wudi watched Emperor Dong's palace soar into the sky and Li Tianlan soar into the sky. The arrogant and invincible arrogance filled the whole dark world. That was his son. Relief, excitement, and ecstasy. There were all kinds of emotions in Dongqing Wudi's heart, but when all the most intense emotions rolled in his heart, there was still a touch of confusion left in his heart. He really did not think that he was worthy of being envied. What Bai Qingqian didn't know was that Dongqing Wudi firmly opposed the so-called future plan at the family meeting when they exchanged Li Tianlan for Dongqing Rushi. He had never thought of letting his son become a supreme heaven's chosen one. He had never thought of making his son the national war god of Zhongzhou State. Nor did he want his son to carry the burden of the entire giant group in the future. That's his pet son. He hoped that his young self would grow up healthily, happily, peacefully and carefreely by his side. At that top-secret family meeting, Dongqing Wudi finally failed to withstand the pressure from the whole family. So he took Li Tianlan back to Dongqing Rushi. After more than 20 years of marriage, Dongqing Wudi was emotionally unstable almost every time he saw Bai Qingqian. He didn't even return to his home in Zhongyuan province. Instead, he stayed in the Border Control Corps all year round. Swift Thunder, Pegasus, Bloodbath, Yellow Sand. His footprints had been to every corner of the Border Control Corps. In the countless times when his emotions had almost completely collapsed, he could only choose to kill. As a result, the name of the god of massacre spread throughout the Dark World. In Zhongzhou State, he was an almost invincible god of massacre. In the Border Control Corps, he was an invincible god. Outside Zhongzhou State, countless people were crazily cursing Dongqing Wudi to die a horrible death and have no descendants. Unfortunately, those people were disappointed. His son stood at the top of the world in his early 20s. Looking back on the past 20 years, in a melancholy and joyful mood, Dongqing Wudi really didn't feel that he had anything to envy. This result was the best result that the Dongqing clan had expected. But at that time, it was a result full of uncertainties. Was it really worth what he had endured for more than 20 years for this uncertain result? The result is always good. Li Huaqing chuckled. Dongqing Wudi was silent and finally shook his head. He said the thoughts that had flashed in his mind countless times over the years. If I can do it again, Dongqing Huangtu will only be Dongqing Huangtu, not Li Tianlan. Dongqing Huang, Li Huaqing muttered to himself and suddenly said, "Does Tianlan know his background?" "He has noticed it, but he hasn't officially admitted anything. I guess he won't admit anything." Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly, but he didn't feel upset about it. He could probably understand Li Tianlan's inner thoughts and the obstacles in some ideas. It was human nature. But although Li Tianlan had never called him and by Qingqin mom and dad so far, Qin Weibai, his daughter-in-law, called them naturally. Even in front of Li Tianlan, she never changed the way she called them. It could be seen that Qin Weibai really wanted Li Tianlan to integrate into the Dongqing clan. Although the final result was still hard to say, now it seemed that the Dongqing clan had exchanged Li Tianlan's son for Dongqing Rushi and Qin Weibai's 2 daughters. Messy thoughts spread out uncontrollably. Li Huaqing ate a piece of beef and said in a vague voice, "Mind telling me the story of that year?" Dongqing Wudi hesitated for a second and said lightly, "It's all a story." Li Huaqing glanced at him, nodded, and didn't ask again. It was all a story, all the past. It didn't matter whether he told it or not. "What's your attitude toward Li Huangtu?" Li Huaqing asked bluntly. After confirming Li Tianlan's origin, he saw clearly the bond between him and the Dongqing clan, which undoubtedly reduced the possibility of Emperor Dong's palace getting out of control. But Li Huaqing would not let go of what should be balanced. In fact, Li Huaqing had always been optimistic about Li Tianlan, which had never changed from the beginning to the present. But he was not optimistic about the ambitious Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun. In fact, he thought that what he was doing now was not against Li Tianlan. What he wanted was balance. From another perspective, correcting and curbing the future development of Emperor Dong's palace, and Li Tianlan was also responsible for him and Zhongzhou State. He hoped to persuade Dongqing Wudi. He was ready for benefits and bargaining chips. As long as he could persuade Dongqing Wudi, then Dongqing Wudi would be very sure to persuade Li Tianlan. Not to mention his origin, even if Li Tianlan was not Dongqing Wudi's son, the giant group's efforts and protection for him were obvious to all. When Dongqing Wudi came forward, it was extremely difficult for Li Tianlan not to give him face. Dongqing Wudi's drinking movement was slightly stiff, and even his expression was stiff for a moment. His attitude? Dongqing Wudi shook his head subconsciously and gave an imperceptible wry smile. He didn't want to have this attitude. But he had to have it. It was even related to some of the deals between the Dongqing clan and the Li family. The Li family would try its best to cultivate Li Tianlan and treat him as the heir of the Li family. And the future child of Li Tianlan and Dongqing Rushi would inherit the Li family. Li Honghe gave the Dongqing clan a glorious future. And at that time, and at the time of his death, he repeatedly made a request. The only request. The old man just hoped that if one day the purgatory of heaven capital and Li Huangtu were really at the end of their rope, the old man hoped that the Dongqing clan could give him a chance. Li Honghe's original voice still rang in his ears. Now facing the captive Li Huangtu, what attitude could he have? Chapter 1196. Perhaps Dongqing Wudi's stiff expression was too obvious. Li Huaqing, who had been observing his emotional changes, directly misunderstood his meaning. He obviously didn't want to give Dongqing Wudi a chance to refuse. He had to protect Li Guangtu. It was important to win Dongqing Wudi's support. If Dongqing Wudi showed his support for Li Tianlan, then their next conversation would undoubtedly be much more difficult. We all understand the importance of the dark world. In recent years, the dark world has been very chaotic, and various influences have been reflected in all aspects. But this is also an opportunity for our Zhongzhou state. Li Guangtu's strength is obvious to all, and the foundation of the purgatory of heaven capital is also there. Their existence is very important to Zhongzhou state. Li Huaqing deliberated over his words and said word by word. He spoke very slowly, so he seemed particularly cautious. He suddenly smiled and continued, "Of course, the knot between him and Tianlan is something that needs to be considered. Zhongzhou state should be able to solve this problem. Whether we are willing to accept it or not, the fact is in front of us. For now, the former Li family no longer exists. What appears in front of us now is Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital. I'm going to find a chance to have a good talk with Li Guangtu and let him recognize the reality. Tianlan, Li Guang, even Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu, their existence has a certain contribution to Zhongzhou state. That's good. Now the dark world is chaotic, but they are standing at the top of the dark world. I hope they can look outside and try to reduce some unnecessary friction." His smile slowly faded and became solemn. "I will warn Li Guangtu, even Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun. In the name of the parliament, I will ask them to maintain their respect for Tianlan in the future. Only by uniting can we have greater gains." "Do you think Tianlan will agree?" Dongqing Wudi took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a drag and asked slowly, "Tianlan is your son." Li Huaqing smiled, his eyes shining. "You're wrong about one thing," Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice. "Tianlan is indeed my son, but he left the family when he was a child. The Dongqing clan is now not qualified to ask him to do anything, let alone restrain him. Tianlan never owes anything to the Dongqing clan. On the contrary, we owe him too much." Li Huaqing was silent for a long time, then he twitched the corner of his mouth and said softly, "In any case, Zhongzhou state must protect Li Guangtu. Wudi, you and I have known each other for many years. You know me and the importance of Li Guangtu to Zhongzhou state. Considering all aspects, keeping Li Guangtu here is, to some extent, a kind of protection for Tianlan. I don't believe that you don't understand this truth." He picked up a piece of beef and said slowly and firmly, "Li Guangtu must stay." The words were not loud, but he was incomparably resolute. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Huaqing coldly and did not speak for a while. Li Huaqing expressed his attitude. From another angle, his meaning was also very obvious. That was, no matter what Dongqing Wudi thought, he had to protect Li Guangtu. If Dongqing Wudi supported his decision, everyone would be happy. If Dongqing Wudi refused, Li Huaqing would do the same. After all, he was the president of Zhongzhou state. If he really insisted on protecting Li Guangtu, who really dared to touch him? If Li Tianlan really killed him in a rage, there would be no place for Emperor Dong's palace in the whole of Zhongzhou state. If Li Tianlan was rational and did not kill Li Guangtu, but also did not let him go, then Zhongzhou state would inevitably take corresponding measures to put pressure on Emperor Dong's palace. Economic assistance in all aspects, public opinion propaganda in multiple channels, resource support in various fields, armament support, there was no doubt about the strength of Emperor Dong's palace now. But after all, the development time was a little short. They were far from reaching the level where they could still develop rapidly after leaving Zhongzhou state. The foundation of Emperor Dong's palace was indeed in Tianan, but Li Tianlan's foundation was in Zhongzhou state. If Zhongzhou state really made up its mind to cut off all support for Emperor Dong's palace, with the financial support of the Flourishing Age Fund, Emperor Dong's palace would not disappear, but it would inevitably lose the opportunity for the fastest development. They would either be in a deadlock without pain or itch, or they would leave Zhongzhou state completely. What Li Huaqing and Guo Wenian said was actually right. With Li Tianlan's current status, if he left Zhongzhou State, Star State, European Alliance, Snow Country, East Island, and many other countries would desperately come to recruit Li Tianlan to join them. As long as Li Tianlan was willing, they would be willing to kneel down and lick his boots. An absolutely invincible expert in the dark world could not be measured by some resources and money. It was no exaggeration to say that the current Li Tianlan was already a super heavyweight who could determine the fate of a superpower for decades to come. But if they really chose this way, only Li Tianlan and a small number of people in Emperor Dong's palace would leave Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State could not allow this to happen, which was tantamount to real treason. Under the fury of the parliament, the entire Emperor Dong's palace would be completely destroyed even if it could not leave Xianyuan City. This was the worst ending, which was not what Li Huaqing wanted to see, nor was it what Emperor Dong's palace was willing to bear. But even if it didn't go to this step, Zhongzhou State would suppress Li Huaqing in many ways. Li Huaqing insisted on protecting Li Guangtu, which would also make Li Tianlan and Zhongzhou State drift apart. Li Huaqing would also directly go to the opposite side of Li Tianlan. What did this mean? He was the president of Zhongzhou State. With this identity, he should not be on the opposite side of anyone. He suppressed the giant group and the southeast group, and gave up on the giant group. But no matter what he did, in essence, he was not an enemy of others. Even if he suppressed Emperor Dong's palace now, it was only for the balance of Zhongzhou State. But once he really went to the opposite side of Li Tianlan, the meaning was completely different. Li Tianlan would not have an easy time. In the future, Li Huaqing would not have an easy time either. This was tantamount to a lose-lose situation, which was also not what Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan were willing to bear. So Dong Qingwudi became the best buffer. If he persuaded Dong Qingwudi and let Dong Qingwudi talk to Li Tianlan about Li Guangtu on behalf of Zhongzhou State, this was undoubtedly the best situation. Li Huaqing did not want to become enemies with Emperor Dong's palace. All he wanted was balance. Li Tianlan was young and impetuous. Under impulse, he might do something that would make everyone regret, but Dong Qingwudi could definitely consider it for him. So Li Huaqing thought that the possibility of persuading Dong Qingwudi was still very high. And what he needed to pay was nothing more than some exchange of interests. Is this a threat? Dong Qingwudi was silent for a while, then suddenly laughed. Must. You rarely say this word. On all kinds of occasions. It's not a threat. Li Huaqing shook his head. I just want to try to create a situation that everyone can accept. This is a discussion with you, or even a request. It doesn't matter. Li Guangtu can't be lost. Dong Qingwudi silently put out the cigarette butt in the ashtray. Li Huaqing ate a piece of beef and suddenly smiled. It smells good. I heard from Lin that Hanbing sent it here? Dong Qingwudi glanced at Li Huaqing intentionally or unintentionally, nodded, and said nothing. At this time, Li Huaqing mentioned Shi Hanbing, which seemed to have some meaning. He is your right-hand man in the Border Control Corps. Have you ever considered transferring him to Yuzhou to help you? The task of the army headquarters is very heavy. Having a capable general can save a lot of effort. Li Huaqing continued to laugh. Dong Qingwudi also smiled and said calmly, the Border Control Corps is also a big business, and someone needs to take care of it. Li Huaqing unconsciously tapped the edge of the table with the chopsticks in his hand, as if he was hesitating about something. This hesitation only lasted for a second and then disappeared. He laughed and said calmly, you can let the Qing dynasty go. Dong Qingwudi suddenly raised his head and looked at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing's smile was indifferent, and his face was inscrutable. Chapter 1197. Dong Qingwudi looked at Li Huaqing silently and did not speak for 5 minutes. There was a plate of beef and 2 glasses of wine. In the smoke, Li Huaqing quietly tasted the beef in front of him, which was really tasty, and let Dong Qingwudi brainstorm in silence. Shi Hanbing went to Yuzhou. The Bai Qing dynasty went to the border. If this was Li Huaqing's condition to get Li Guangtu back from Li Tianlan, it seemed to be too generous. Dong Qingwudi didn't have time to think about how generous it was, But he could clearly see Li Huaqing's sincerity and kindness from this so-called exchange. Dong Qingwudi silently picked up the glass in front of him, drank up the wine in the glass in front of him, and took a long breath. I'm not hostile to Emperor Dong's palace. Li Huaqing finally spoke again, with calmness in his faint smile. I will give Tianlan an explanation about the Li family, Phoenix Pavilion, and Kunlun City, which will satisfy him. What I want to do is very simple. It took us thousands of years to go from feudalism to democracy. This is historical progress and an inevitable trend. It's hard to understand how subtle it is. Invincible, if you are not in my position, it's hard to understand. I fully recognize Tianlan's ability and the height that Emperor Dong's palace can reach in the future. Zhongzhou State wants to see a heavenly son who can be supreme in the dark world, but I don't want this heavenly son to be supreme in Zhongzhou State and ignore everything. If all this happens, it means that we are reversing history, and it can't last long. There is no misunderstanding between Tianlan and me, but there are some unpleasantness. I think such unpleasantness should be controlled within a normal range. Gu Xingyun is selfish, Jiang Shangyu is ambitious, and Li Guangtu is too paranoid. To be honest, I don't like them, but their existence can make Tianlan more aware of his position. There are some things that you, me, Tianlan, and everyone can't touch. If you touch it, it will be subverting the system. What I want to do is to let Tianlan walk on the most right path. I can see through Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Guangtu. They may be thoughtful, but their purpose is too obvious. But I couldn't see through him. I didn't know what he wanted or what his future would be like. His mind was not simple, but chaotic. No one could say that Emperor Dong's palace could become what it was today because of Tianlan's painstaking efforts. He wanted to control everything, but it seemed that he did not have a strong desire for power. This wasn't a compliment, but a warning. I don't even know what he wants. How can I trust him? The most important thing is that Tianlan is still too young. His mind and his martial arts are all in the process of continuous growth, faster and faster. Zhongzhou State needed a heavenly son who could deter the whole world as an individual. Unless it was the last resort, Zhongzhou State would not give up on him. So I need people like Jiang Shangyu, Gu Xingyun, and Li Guangtu. It's also a kind of protection. The three of them are no match for Tianlan, so how can they defeat Emperor Dong's palace? But in the framework of Zhongzhou State, with their covetous eyes, Emperor Dong's palace will be more cautious. Crack! The lighter lit the cigarette. A misty mist floated in the living room. Li Huaqing took a deep breath and said flatly, "What I want is the balance of Zhongzhou State, a controllable situation. In this situation, everyone is controllable. You, me, every director, every member of parliament, every wealthy family, including Tianlan, can be controlled. That's the only thing I want. As for other things, power, wealth, and status, as long as Tianlan asks, I can give them. But if he wants Zhongzhou State, I can't give it to him." Dong Qingwudi continued to be silent. After a long time, he slowly nodded and said, "I see." Li Huaqing's words and deeds were consistent. Dong Qingwudi was very clear about this. If not, there would not have been a fundamental conflict between Li Huaqing and Chen Fangqing. Li Tianlan's 2 years in the desert prison were 2 years when the Southeast Group and the Giant Group were reshuffled, and also 2 years when they were strongly suppressed by the Academy and the Prince Group. But compared with Chen Fangqing and the Prince Group's relentless pursuit, the academics always hindered the Prince Group intentionally or unintentionally. Although it did not seem obvious, it was true that Li Huaqing was controlling some progress. Chen Fangqing wanted to eradicate the cancer of Zhongzhou State. But there was no cancer in Li Huaqing's eyes. What he wanted was a stable situation. For some forces that were so powerful that Zhongzhou State could not control, he would weaken them, but he would never choose to completely destroy them. In his eyes, a destroyed Wang family of Beihai was also a huge loss to Zhongzhou State. So Chen Fangqing could not bear it anymore and came up with the so-called termination plan. Now Li Huaqing treated Li Tianlan the same way. Emperor Dong's palace was now controllable, and it was completely under the control of Zhongzhou State. Emperor Dong's palace was very powerful, rich, with many masters and amazing potential. These were objective facts. But in front of Zhongzhou State, what was the current Emperor Dong's palace? Everything they had just started, and all their potential and even their financial resources had not been exchanged for real strength. If Zhongzhou State was determined to move against Emperor Dong's palace, from beginning to end, it might be just a matter of pressing a button. In a few minutes, everything in Emperor Dong's palace would disappear. Li Huaqing could not make such a decision, but he also saw the possibility that Emperor Dong's palace would be powerful beyond control. So he kept Gu Xingyun, supported Jiang Shangyu, and wanted to rescue Li Guangtu in order to create an opponent who could balance Li Tianlan. He could give Li Tianlan everything he wanted, but he would never allow Emperor Dong's palace to rise completely and control Zhongzhou State while breaking away from the control of Zhongzhou State. If it really came to this, it would no longer be a game. Instead, it was a battle to the death where blood flowed like rivers. This was what Li Huaqing tried his best to avoid. So he found Dongqing Wudi tonight. It was not a negotiation or a threat. It was full of sincerity and kindness. Shi Hanbing was transferred to the army headquarters. Bai Qingzhao was transferred from the army headquarters. This also meant that as long as Dongqing Wudi was willing, Bai Qingzhao would be the next commander of the Border Control Corps. There was no problem with Bai Qingzhao's qualifications. The only flaw might be his strength. Compared with Dongqing Wudi, who was at the top of the half-step invincible realm, Bai Qingzhao was only at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. In the Border Control Corps, he was far from the strongest. But because of his origin and Dongqing Wudi's relationship, these flaws were nothing at all. Bai Qingzhao was in this position now. Then 5 years later, as Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi retired, the possibility of Bai Qingzhao taking over Dongqing Wudi's current position would be infinitely close to 100%. This would undoubtedly allow the giant group to better protect the new group that had just risen. And because the giant group continued to be strong in the army headquarters, the academics would also become a firm ally of the giant group and even the new group in the next 5 years or even longer. This was not a condition for exchanging Li Guangtu. This was a signal. And as long as Li Tianlan accepted this signal, then everything else could be discussed. I will go to Tiannan as soon as possible. Dongqing Wudi said in a steady voice. Have a good talk with Tianlan. Chapter 1198. Late at night, Dongqing Hongguang, who had fallen asleep, received a call from Dongqing Wudi. The old man was 80 years old. Although his martial arts foundation at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm was still there, the aging of his body was inevitable. He had been living like a prince for many years and had gradually let go of his martial arts. His state began to decline more than a decade ago. As he grew older, his spirit began to deteriorate, so he generally went to bed early and got up early. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when the phone rang. Usually, Dongqing Hongguang would get up and take a walk on the mountain in about an hour if there was no accident. The timing of Dongqing Wudi's call was subtle, which was enough to show the urgency of the matter. Turning on the chandelier in the bedroom, Dongqing Hongguang sat on the bed and shook his head hard. Outside the bedroom, there were rapid but light and not the slightest messy footsteps. As one of the few veterans of the older generation in Zhongzhou State, the minister of army headquarters more than 20 years ago, and the anchor of the giant group, Dongqing Hongguang's health was of great importance to everyone, not only his enemies but also his own people. It was no exaggeration to say that as long as Dongqing Hongguang was still there, the giant group might be lonely, but it would never disappear. It was the same as the Li family back then. How earth-shattering was the case of treason. But Li Honghe could still leave Yuzhou with nearly 2,000 elites of the Li family and enter the border. It was not a complete retreat, but it also preserved the core strength that should be preserved. So when the light in Dongqing Hongguang's bedroom was turned on, the highly focused guard on duty had pressed the call button. The medical team that the parliament had assigned to Dongqing Hongguang rushed out with instruments and all kinds of drugs in line with Dongqing Hongguang's physical condition and stood at the door of Dongqing Hongguang's room. I'm fine. Dongqing Hongguang shook his head. When he saw the caller ID on the phone, he quickly sobered up. He held the phone, said something to the door, and then continued, Go back and rest. There was a crisp and powerful voice outside the door, and the footsteps gradually faded away and finally disappeared. The phone call from Dongqing Wudi also stopped. Dongqing Hongguang thought about it and called Dongqing Wudi directly back. The phone rang once and was quickly connected. The roar of the helicopter's roar came faintly from the other end of the phone. Dongqing Hongguang frowned slightly, and Dongqing Wudi's apologetic voice rang in his ears. Dad, am I disturbing your rest? I'm fine. Dongqing Hongguang's voice was steady. I'm old. I don't have much sleep. If I want to sleep, I'll have plenty of chances in the future. Before Dongqing Wudi could say anything, he smiled and asked directly, What's the matter? The president just left my place. Dongqing Wudi did not hesitate to enter the whole body directly. The internal style of the Dongqing clan had always been straightforward. It was the standard military style, iron-blooded and direct, and what they disliked most was nonsense. Dongqing Hongguang narrowed his eyes and answered with confusion. It's about Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi's voice was a little unclear in the roar of the helicopter's rotors, but every word reached Dongqing Hongguang's ears. Just yesterday, Jiang Shangyu, Li Guangtu, and Gu Xingyun besieged Tianlan and suffered a crushing defeat. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun escaped with serious injuries. Li Guangtu was captured alive by Tianlan and brought back to Xinyuan City. The president is here for this matter. Dongqing Hongguang froze in place and did not speak for a while. He had a regular schedule and went to bed early. When the news that Li Tianlan had seriously injured the three masters and really established his invincible status spread throughout the dark world, Dongqing Hongguang had already fallen asleep. This was undoubtedly a very important piece of good news, but it was okay to know the good news later, so no one disturbed Dongqing Hongguang's sleep. Dongqing Hongguang himself did not expect that Li Tianlan would bring such a huge impact to him within a few minutes after waking up. After a long time, Dongqing Hongguang took a deep breath and smiled. He whispered softly, almost murmuring, with an imperceptible tremor. This piece of news came to his ears abruptly, driving away all his drowsiness and drowsiness. Thousands of words were constantly brewing in his heart. This day was too long. The past was vivid in his mind. Time was like a knife, and the pictures of the past were constantly flashing in his mind. That year, Li Honghe, who was still at his peak, left the mountain of the Dongqing clan with the newborn baby in his arms. Dongqing Hongguang stood on the top of the mountain, silently watching the old and the little figure get farther and farther away. In front of them was the spreading frost and snow. At that time, Dongqing Hongguang told himself that 20 years later, the child taken away would become the pillar of the giant group and even the whole Zhongzhou state. Invincible and invincible. More than 20 years. The Dongqing clan had been waiting for this day for too long. There were accidents, setbacks, pain, and uneasiness. But in the end, they got the result they wanted most. Dongqing Hongguang was in a daze. He did not know what to say for a while except for the word, good. The bedroom door was slowly pushed open. Uncle Fu, the old butler of the Dongqing clan, came in with a cup of tea, put it in front of Dongqing Hongguang, and quietly left. Dongqing Hongguang finally came to his senses and took a deep breath. The corners of his mouth curled up uncontrollably. His hand that was holding the phone kept trembling, but his voice was still steady as he hummed in agreement. The president wants to get Li Guangtu back from Tianlan and hopes that we can communicate with Tianlan. Communicate? Dongqing Wudi whispered. I'm on my way to the airport now, ready to fly straight to Dunnan. There was no airport in Tiannan at present. Flying straight to Tiannan obviously would not take a passenger plane. The sound of the helicopter was whistling. Dongqing Wudi obviously took a helicopter from the Hidden Dragon Sea to the nearest military airport and took a fighter jet straight to Xinyuan City. With the speed of the fighter jet and the speed of Dongqing Wudi's arrival at the airport, Dongqing Wudi could appear in Emperor Dong's palace within an hour. That's an expected attitude. Dongqing Hongguang said lightly, then frowned slightly. You're in a hurry. Dongqing Wudi was silent, then smiled and said, At this time, he could naturally go to Xinyuan City to communicate with Li Tianlan, but such a hurry might stimulate Li Tianlan's reverse psychology. Of course, he had to go to Xinyuan City, but there was no need to be too anxious. The parliament was indeed worried about Li Guangtu's life, but if Li Tianlan really wanted to kill him, he would not have taken him back to Xinyuan City. You take a passenger plane to Nanyuan City and enter Xinyuan City from there. Dongqing Hongguang said calmly. Dongqing Wudi hesitated and said with a smile, "Okay. What on earth did the academics promise Tianlan to make you so anxious?" Dongqing Hongguang smiled faintly. They relented about the Border Control Corps. Dongqing Wudi said, "What else?" Dongqing Hongguang asked indifferently. The Border Control Corps was indeed a problem, but if the Dongqing clan fought for it with all its might, there was at least a 70% chance of winning the position. The only variable was that some of the backbone forces at other levels of the Border Control Corps might be transferred away, so as to weaken the Dongqing clan's influence on the Border Control Corps. Li Huaqing mentioned the Border Control Corps, but in fact, what he offered was not the position of a commander, but the position of a part of the backbone forces. These were naturally very tempting, but not enough. This was not like Li Huaqing's style. He was not so narrow-minded. He means to let Han Bing enter Yuzhou and let Qin Chao lead the Border Control Corps. Dongqing Wudi continued. Dongqing Hongguang was stunned and narrowed his eyes. He understood Li Huaqing's meaning immediately. Dongqing Hongguang slowly stood up, took a sip of tea, and suddenly said, "These are all for the giant group. What about Tianlan?" Li Tianlan was from the Dongqing clan. Li Huaqing had made sure of this. But now no one dared to say that Emperor Dong's palace belonged to the giant group. Li Huaqing said that these were all benefits for the giant group, but what could he give Li Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then whispered the most important condition given by Li Huaqing, Beijiang. Chapter 1199. Li Huaqing offered the heaviest bargaining chip. No matter what other thoughts he had in his heart, or whether he would be very reluctant, in that kind of negotiation atmosphere, the bargaining chip he offered must be fully guaranteed to be fulfilled. Beijiang. This was what he planned to use to stabilize Emperor Dong's palace. The province of 1.7 million square kilometers was equivalent to 1/6 of the total area of Zhongzhou State. It was the largest province in Zhongzhou State and a province that had always been coordinated by Zhongzhou State councillors. This was an unparalleled temptation. It was also an unprecedented challenge. For Emperor Dong's palace, this was the case. The new group was rising in Zhongzhou State with incomparable vigor. Everyone inside and outside the game could see its increasingly clear outline. With Xinyuan City as the core and Jiangzhe as the foundation, the shadow of Emperor Dong's palace was slowly shrouding Dongshan, Jiangnan, Xie, and Nanyue. If Beijiang was added, the new group almost had a kind of power that was almost no less than that of the Southeast group. If Tiannan also became a part of Zhongzhou State in the future, with its special geographical location and source, Tiannan province would inevitably have an absolute position in the future. From another perspective, as long as Li Tianlan could keep his current territory, in 5 or 10 years, the new group would be a supergroup with 3 councillors in the worst case. The strength of the Southeast group lay in its 2 extremely stable promotion channels in Wuyue and Beijiang. As long as Emperor Dong's palace accepted Li Huaqing's conditions, they would have 2 extremely stable promotion channels in Nanyue and Beijiang. In the future, Tiannan would be added. In his current state, 10 years later, there was no need to use uncertain adjectives such as almost, probably, and perhaps. The new group would inevitably become the most powerful group in Zhongzhou State in 10 years. There was no doubt about this. Li Huaqing means who will go to Beijiang? Dongqing Hongguang's voice was a little low. Dongqing Wudi thought for a moment and said softly, "He didn't say." Dongqing Hongguang laughed, and his voice seemed to be mixed with sneer and emotion. Beijiang was in front of them. It was an opportunity, a temptation, and a problem. The most difficult thing was that the new group had no one. The new group had a lot of talents. Not to mention others, just in Jiangzhe, the team that Wu Jingmin had painstakingly brought out for more than 20 years was enough to support a large group in time. What was the situation of Jiangzhe in recent years? Since the Li family, Wu Jingmin had been firmly rooted here. They seemed to be a part of the Southeast Group, but as the territory of the Li family, Jiangzhe faced the ubiquitous pressure from the Southeast Group and the covetous eyes of other major groups. Everyone wanted to break up the last bit of the Li family's power and take Jiangzhe into their own hands. Jiangzhe had been very stable in the past 20 years, but it was also unstable. All kinds of transfers were carried out intermittently. Under such circumstances, it was a miracle that Wu Jingmin could stand firm in Jiangzhe. This was not his own miracle, but a miracle that belonged to the entire Jiangzhe. Those who were able to walk to the top and become Wu Jingmin's trusted aides were all true elites left behind by the great waves. There weren't many of them, but each of them could hold their own, be it in terms of ability or loyalty. They were all top-notch. With Wu Jingmin's entry into the cabinet and the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace, Jiangzhe began to rise. Zhou Yuanshan entered Jiangzhe. Wang Jingxin left Lin. Dongqing Qiuqi followed closely. Jiangzhe had made all kinds of big moves in recent years. As the outline of the new group became more and more clear, the forces of the entire Jiangzhe began to break into the righteous altar of Zhongzhou state in a very aggressive manner. This was the greatest wealth that Li Honghe had left to Li Tianlan, and its significance was even greater than that of the veterans of the Li family standing beside Li Tianlan now. The new group was now in a clear but secretive structure. With this election, 6 of the 13 congressmen in Jiangzhou would take more important positions, including the governor of Nanyue, the speaker of Dongshan, the governor of Dongshan, the governor of Dongshan, the speaker of Siye, the governor of Jiangnan, and so on. This was the full outbreak of the power of Jiangzhe after more than 20 years of accumulation. It was like the sun piercing the dark sky, symbolizing the rising sun of the new group. In another 5 years, with the current team of the new group, they might be able to win more key positions of congressmen. But they needed to stay there for 5 years. Judging from the current situation, no one in the new group had the qualifications to compete for the position of congressman, and no one had the qualifications to go to a key province like Beijing. That was why there was the initial integration of the giant group and the new group. According to the normal development, the giant group would be integrated into the new group sooner or later. As the heavenly son from the Dongqing clan, the Bai family and the Zhou family in Yuzhou all fully approved of Li Tianlan inheriting all this. But it took time. It was necessary to complete many exploratory integration in the elections again and again to ensure that there was no too much turbulence and backlash within the giant group. Otherwise, Emperor Dong's palace would not absorb help. It would be constant trouble and internal instability. Now in this election, only 5 people, or 4, had been confirmed to join the new group from the giant group. The first one was Bai Qingqian. She was undoubtedly qualified to go to Beijing. As an extraordinary woman in the altar of Zhongzhou state, although Bai Qingqian was a woman, she could be called one of the most powerful chairmen in Zhongzhou state. It was not the kind of unreasonable oppression. In the working state, Bai Qingqian had a sharp and clear mind, a strong sense of the overall situation, a good sense of advance and retreat, aggressive sharpness, and steady as a rock. In the eyes of the outside world, Bai Qingqian joining the new group was definitely a good move. If she continued to stay in the giant group, the position of congressman might be her end. But now, after joining the new group, with the strong rise of Emperor Dong's palace, Bai Qingqian might very well become the second female prime minister since the founding of Zhongzhou state. History always repeated itself. The first female prime minister since the founding of Zhongzhou state came from the Wang family of Beihai, which was the period when the Wang family of Beihai quickly reached its peak. Now, with Emperor Dong's palace constantly sprinting toward the peak, who could be sure that Bai Qingqian could not reach this level? After Bai Qingqian, the second confirmed to join the new group from the giant group was Cheng Huaining, the highest commander of the European garrison. After the election, he would be transferred back to Yuzhou and become the spokesperson of the new group in the army headquarters. The third and fourth were the husband and wife, Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi. Zhou Yuanshan was the absolute core flag task of the giant group after 20 years. His joining the new group represented the decision of the integration of the giant group and the new group. Now Zhou Yuanshan was the governor of Nanyue. The giant group and the new group were trying their best to push him to the position of Speaker of Nanyue in the election. Nanyue's economy was extremely developed. Although it was occasionally overtaken by Wuyue inexplicably, Nanyue was the only place that was qualified to compete with Wuyue for the position of the first province in Zhongzhou State. Almost all the speakers were congressmen. Zhou Yuanshan, who was 38 years old, was undoubtedly not qualified to be a member of parliament. The direction of the giant group and the new group's efforts was to push Zhou Yuanshan into the parliament and serve as an honorary member of parliament. Another name for honorary member of parliament was alternate member of parliament. It had a certain power of a member of parliament. It could participate in the meeting of the parliament and had the right to speak, but it had no right to vote. But as long as he could enter the parliament, express his views, and have ideological confrontation with the giants, it was enough for Zhou Yuanshan. The honorary member of parliament could barely stay in Nanyue, so the two groups were now sparing no effort to promote Zhou Yuanshan. Similarly, Zhou Yuanshan was also a candidate who could barely go to Beijiang. But no one would be willing to give up Nanyue and choose Beijiang. The bargaining chip offered by Li Huaqing was indeed tempting enough, but it was also like a dilemma. Because the new group could not push out a candidate who could go to Beijiang to serve as the speaker for the time being. The giant group had such a candidate, but it was already their plan to let 4 people join the new group. At this time, if they let a member of parliament enter the new group, there would inevitably be turbulence inside the giant group. Now the best choice seemed to be to let Bai Qingqian give up the position of deputy prime minister and go to Beijiang. After all, Li Huaqing still agreed with some of Qin Fangqing's ideas. He also did not want to see the emergence of a new group that was too strong in the cabinet. But his approach was relatively mild, which was equivalent to exchanging the largest province of Zhongzhou State for a position in the cabinet. This is a good bargaining chip. Dongqing Hongguang said faintly, it's just a complete exchange, an exchange of duties. In fact, we even suffer a loss. That's it. Does he still want to exchange for Li Kuangtu? Does he want to get something for nothing? Tianlan won't agree. Dongqing Wudi laughed. Then why are you still going to Xinyuan City? Dongqing Hongguang raised his eyebrows. I'm in a hurry now because I'm waiting for Li Huaqing's new bargaining chip. In addition, I want you to give me some advice. Maybe we should take the initiative and make some requests. The corner of Dongqing Hongguang's mouth moved, and he fell silent. Dongqing Wudi smiled, with a touch of high enthusiasm and excitement in his voice. Tonight, before Li Huaqing came to me, many people contacted me. Dongqing Hongguang raised his eyebrows slightly. Star State Army Department, Men in Black, German Army Department, England Army Department, France, Kunlun City. All kinds of forces, there are about 20. Dongqing Wudi chuckled. Dongqing Hongguang froze for a moment, and then laughed. That thing, is it settled? It's been brewing for a few months, and now the time is ripe. I signed my name on the document, and the result is as we expected. Dongqing Wudi laughed and said, maybe at this time, the news has begun to explode in the dark world. He held his mobile phone, looked out of the window at the deep night, and whispered, Old Master, our time has really come. Chapter 1200. The busy crowd began to disappear. All kinds of instruments were turned off one by one. In the secret room that gradually quieted down, the mechanical clock on the wall ticked. Jiang Shangyu looked at the communication that had been hung up and turned to look at Gu Xingyun. In 3 hours, we'll go back to China. Gu Xingyun sneered, but there was an extremely weak look in his eyes. His breakthrough was smoother than he had imagined. In just a few days, he went from close to the peak of the invincible realm to the top of the peak of the invincible realm. In terms of physical fitness alone, his physical fitness had exceeded the boundary of the peak of the invincible realm. Such a huge and explosive progress could be said to be a meteoric rise. In this state, Gu Xingyun was sure that he could easily beat 3 or 5 of himself before the breakthrough. He thought he was standing at the peak of the dark world. This feeling didn't change even after he lost to Li Tianlun. There was only one person who was truly invincible in the world. But others also had the power to stand at the peak. Whether Li Tianlun was there or not, Gu Xingyun felt that he was standing at the top of the dark world. His body had crossed the uncrossable boundary. As long as he was given time, in 3 or 5 years, he was confident that he could completely improve his realm and reach the level of Li Kuangtu. He thought that in this way he could lead Kunlun City to continue to take root in Zhongzhou State. Maybe he would face the oppression of Emperor Dong's palace, but with allies like Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu, his future would never be desperate and gloomy. But now, he did have the power to stand at the peak of the dark world. But other than that, he had nothing. What else can I do when I go back to China? Gu Xingyun said lightly. Jiang Shangyu glanced at him. Your mentality will make me lose my confidence in you. The current situation is really bad, but it's not unacceptable. We still have a chance and our cooperation. It's your cooperation with Zhongzhou State. Gu Xingyun said in a cold voice. Does Kunlun City have the capital to cooperate with you now? What does your cooperation with Zhongzhou State have to do with me? Do you think it's a betrayal? Jiang Shangyu narrowed his eyes. Does it matter? Gu Xingyun said with a faint smile. Of course it is important. Jiang Shangyu nodded. You are our ally, and Kunlun City is a very important part of our strength. As I said at the beginning, it will be beneficial for both of us if we cooperate. He paused for a moment, then laughed again. And besides standing on my side, do you have any other choice? It looks like it, but it's only looks. You can reject everything we talked about today and leave Zhongzhou State angrily. For Zhongzhou State, this is a betrayal. Li Huaqing's thunderous fury is not something you can handle. Because, at your position once you leave Zhongzhou State, you will violate the bottom line of Zhongzhou State. No matter how stiff the relationship between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlun is, in this case, he will let Li Tianlun clean up the mess. Without our allies, you are no match for Li Tianlun now. Or, are you going to seek refuge with Li Tianlun? Just like hundreds of years ago, when you turned to the Lin clan and then wagged your tail beside the original Li family? Jiang Shangyu smiled brightly. Let's not talk about dignity. You and I both know that dignity is not important in the face of survival. But do you really think Li Tianlun can accept your surrender? It's impossible. You know that. Li Tianlun can't tolerate you. He wants to annex the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Many people in the Purgatory of Heaven capital can't tolerate you, and the elders of the Li family who stay with Li Tianlun can't tolerate you either. So you can't join Emperor Dong's palace. Even if Li Tianlun temporarily takes you in, you are just a dog at his feet, even worse than a dog. You can only be cannon fodder to deal with us. When he uses you to clean us up, guess who will be the next one to die? Gu Xingyun listened with no expression. Jiang Shangyu rubbed his brand new arm. This was the real arm that he made for himself with his authority before the real environment blocked the world. Feeling his arm becoming more and more flexible, he said in a flat voice, "Only we are your best allies and your best choice. What I can be sure of is that Li Tianlun's state when he fought with us was a little special. Under normal circumstances, we are indeed no match for him, but there shouldn't be such a big gap between us. I'm not talking about whether we can catch up to his strength, but at the very least, his strength is within our understanding. In this kind of environment, if we attack him again, the result will definitely be different. You said it yourself." Gu Xingyun said coldly, "Only for now. The present is the present, and also the future." Jiang Shangyu smiled and said, "I think Li Tianlun has reached the peak state he can reach, at least infinitely close. In the future, Li Tianlun may make further progress, but it will not be too obvious. What is certain is that it is impossible for him to make a huge breakthrough in combat capability and reach the level of Wang Tianzong in Mormons. This is impossible." Gu Xingyun raised his head and looked at Jiang Shangyu seriously. Jiang Shangyu did not explain anything. Unknown had completely fallen. This was something he confirmed from absorbing Unknown's memories. The real environment had completely sealed off the Miracle City. It was theoretically possible for Li Tianlan to break through the blockade of the real environment by himself. But it was only in theory. If he wanted to break through the blockade of the real environment, Li Tianlan needed the real brand. But his true imprint was not complete. Li Tianlan's real brand and a wisp of his soul were deep in Qin Weibai's real brand. This was the key to Huang Shi to protect Qin Weibai and not let her die completely. But now it became the key to blocking Li Tianlan's room for progress. Because the real Qin Weibai had already died in the Eternal Sword. This also meant that Li Tianlan had no possibility to break through the blockade of the real environment. After his combat capability reached a certain level, because his soul and real brand were not complete, he would never make any progress in his life. Jiang Shangyu gently raised the corner of his mouth and said, "We don't have nothing now. We just take a step back for the time being. I still have a trump card in my hand." He looked at Gu Xingyun and whispered with a smile, "After going back, find a suitable opportunity, maybe I can play this card." Enjoy the look of making Li Tianlan collapse. How about it? Are you looking forward to it? Chapter 1201. In the deep and obscure night, the fighter plane that took off from Yuzhou landed at a base in Nanyuan. Dong Qingwudi, who didn't waste any time along the way, walked alone on the prepared helicopter. In the roar of the rotors, the night of Nanyuan was receding, and the brilliant lights of Shenyuan City were getting closer and closer. Jiang Shangyu left the Secret Research Institute in South America. He and Gu Xingyun were going to a small city 200 kilometers away, then take a train across hundreds of kilometers of wilderness to another city, and then take a plane back to Zhongzhou State. The ground of America had been shaking slightly. The huge earthquake with continuous aftershocks was spreading to the entire American land plate, and there were whales everywhere. If the railway was destroyed, the train was naturally useless. Jiang Shangyu had begun to consider the route from South America to North America and then to Zhongzhou State. After a sleepless night, Li Huaqing returned to his office in the Hidden Dragon Sea and made a cup of strong tea by himself. Exhaustion hit his body and mind like a tide, but his brain was not sleepy at all. He looked at the clock on the wall, calculated the time after Dong Qingwudi arrived in Tiannan, and waited quietly for the news. Guo Wentian, the only leader of the Prince Group, had left the Hidden Dragon Sea after hanging up the communication with Jiang Shangyu a few hours ago. His current whereabouts were unknown, but it was clear that the Prince Group was now ready to welcome the new situation. Tiannan, Heaven Capital. The governor of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The sword energy that pervaded heaven and earth surged under the night sky. Daybreak, dawn, phoenix, countless masters and elites of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were still trapped in the headquarters. The sword energy blockade left by Li Tianlan didn't weaken at all. Standing in the center of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and looking at the night sky, colorful sword lights flashed from time to time between heaven and earth, with sharpness and killing, trapping all the forces of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital that wanted to go out. No one could break through the sword energy left by Li Tianlan here. Including Daybreak, another invincible realm expert in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The surging sword energy swept the whole city. Daybreak once wanted to break through by force, but under the blockade of the sword energy, he could barely take 3 steps and had to retreat with serious injuries. No one could leave. But the news was still being passed on. Everyone already knew the cooperation between Li Guangtu and Gu Xingyun. They also knew that Li Guangtu was now captured by Li Tianlan. The atmosphere inside the Purgatory of Heaven Capital became depressing and gloomy, and even a little dull. Snow Country. Wang Xiaoyao, who had returned with serious injuries after the battle in North Sea, locked himself in the dark hall and looked at a lit LCD screen in the center of the hall. His eyes flickered, and no one knew what he was thinking. On the stage, a formidable person in North Sea, Wang Shengxiao, who was wearing a coat of sword energy, looked at the vast sea in the distance without saying a word. Wang Tianzong's sword energy stood beside him as if he seemed to be waiting for something quietly. The news that the 3 masters besieged Li Tianlan caused a stir in the dark world. But the dark world quickly fell silent again. Amidst the extreme pressure, every force and every person seemed to be waiting for something. Everyone knew what they were waiting for. The suffocating feeling was suffocating. At 4:50 in the morning, Zhongzhou State Time. Dongqing Wudi had just arrived in Xinyuan City. The news that everyone had been waiting for swept through the entire dark world at the speed of a hurricane, exploding everyone's thoughts. The army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City of Zhongzhou State, the Wang family of Beihai, Emperor Dong Palace, Sai City, Mount Shu, Jade Pool, European Alliance, Shadow Throne, Snow Country Military Department, Sanctuary, Rothschild, Dark Knights. Star State, Men in Black, Army Headquarters, Fantasy World, Heroes Club. Burning Legion, Mercenaries on Fire, Death's Embrace, Shadow Blade, Flame Chariot, one country after another. One force after another formed the current Dark World. That night, all the forces in the Dark World jointly released a new message. This was undoubtedly an extremely rare thing. But to a certain extent, this wasn't a rare occurrence. Because the Dark World had experienced many times in the past decades and centuries. It had been 5 years since all the major forces released the news together. Everyone knew very well that there was only one thing that could make all the countries and the major forces release the news together. This news might not be absolutely accurate, but it was also absolutely authoritative. It was a list that fully demonstrated the comparison of the peak power of each country and the major superpowers. To be more precise, it was the New World Divine List ranking. It included dozens of countries, all the superpowers, hundreds of second-class large forces, countless mercenary groups, and a large number of killer organizations. It included the entire Dark World. After a series of games, it was recognized by all the forces and announced to the World Divine List ranking. Everyone was paying close attention to the list. On the short list, everyone could see the power of Zhongzhou State completely rising in the Dark World. The 15th place on the World Divine List, the last place. The former commander of the Border Control Corps, the youngest marshal of the army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, the disciple of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong, Di Jiang. Although Di Jiang, who had been defeated by Li Tianlan, had been imprisoned in Beihai for the past 2 years, it was obvious that the Dark World had not forgotten him. This list had been recognized by the Wang family of Beihai. In a sense, it seemed to indicate that Wang Xingxiao had plans to restart Di Jiang in the near future. The 14th place on the World Divine List. 2 people tied. The Deputy Palace Master of Emperor Dong's Palace, the former number 1 of Samsara Palace. Heavenly King, Nirvana Sword Master of Mount Shu, St. Wei Kunlun. Daybreak, the Lord of Sanluo Temple in Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The two broke through to the Invincible Realm at roughly the same time. Although they had not fought many times in the past few years and it was difficult to compare, their specific realms were roughly the same. They both barely stabilized their Invincible Realm strength and were good at using swords. There was some other meaning in putting these 2 people together on the 14th place on the World Divine List. The 13th place on the World Divine List was also tied with 2 people. The Deputy Palace Lord of Emperor Dong's Palace, the Governor of Sai City in Zhongzhou State, Sidutangyue, the Hidden God of Zhongzhou State. Ramelun, the Commander of the Burning Legion. The Burning Legion had taken root in Tianan so far. It could be said that it was the strongest force in Tianan except for Emperor Dong's Palace. Ramelun, the Commander of the Burning Legion, and Situ Tsangyue were both experts who were close to the peak of the Invincible Realm. All the major forces recognized this ranking. If the parties involved did not recognize the tie, they could push down those who were as famous as themselves. The 12th place on the World Divine List. Afar, the Chief of the Dark Knights. Afar's injury had not healed since the chaos in Snow Country, but he had recovered his combat capability. His strength was also recognized as slightly stronger than that of Situ Tsangyue and the others. The 11th place on the World Divine List. Moraid, the former deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps in the Sanctuary and the chief of the Knights Templars. As an expert who was closest to the peak of the Invincible Realm, his strength was obviously stronger than the last few. Everyone recognized his ranking. The 10th place on the World Divine List. Paul, the current patriarch of Rothschild. The current patriarch of Rothschild, who was seriously injured after taking action once in the chaos of Snow Empire, seemed to be somewhat tragic, but his personal strength was beyond doubt. 9th on the World Divine List. Dark Knight's Guild, Dark Queen Moongaze. There was no doubt that in the few years after the death of the master of Samsara Palace, Mochizuki-song, who had supported the Dark Knights alone, had become the most legendary female expert in the Dark World. 8th place on the World Divine List. Wang Xiaoyao from the Wang family of Beihai. His ranking was ahead of Moongaze and Song, which was the result witnessed by the entire Dark World in the final battle of Beihai. 7th place on the World Divine List. Li Shi, the wife of the former governor of Kunlun City and the current deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. No adjectives were needed to prove his achievements. Everyone could see one fact clearly. That was Li Shi's strength. The peak of the invincible realm. To be exact, it started from Wang Xiaoyao, who ranked 8th on the World Divine List. The weakest of the top 8 on the World Divine List was at the peak of the invincible realm. This was a lineup that had never been seen on the World Divine List in the past hundreds of years. It signified an unprecedented amount of gold. It also meant that an incomparably grand era had completely descended. Chapter 1202. If Wang Xiaoyao, who ranked 8th on the World Divine List, had not clearly made the Dark World feel anything, then the appearance of Li Shi, the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, who ranked 7th, had completely made the Dark World realize that this year's World Divine List was incredibly valuable. Wang Xiaoyao was also at the peak of the invincible realm. It was just that he had hidden his strength for too long. Now that the news had spread, it gave people a feeling that he was very strong but also a little weak. But Li Shi was totally different. Before she officially became the deputy palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace, most people in the Dark World did not even know who Li Shi was. Only a few superpowers upper echelons understood the power behind this name. As the center of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State in the past 2 decades, the names of Kunlun City and Zhongzhou State's war god Gu Xingyun could be said to be famous in the Dark World. But those super forces all knew very well that the person with the highest realm and the strongest combat capability in Kunlun City was not Gu Xingyun. It was Li Shi, the wife of the city governor of Kunlun City. When Gu Xingyun was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, Li Shi was already at the real peak of the invincible realm. Now, Li Shi, who had been at the peak of the invincible realm for many years, announced to the whole Dark World that she had officially set foot in the Dark World after becoming the deputy palace master of Emperor Dong's palace. All the countries and forces in the world ranked her 7th. My ranking is low? Or was it too valuable? Gu Xingyun could be said to be a frequent visitor to the World Divine List in the past 20 years. The ranking of the Divine List took place once every 5 years. Gu Xingyun had been on the list for the past 4 times, from the initial 9th place all the way up. 10 years ago, Gu Xingyun, who was close to the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 4th on the Divine List. 5 years ago, Gu Xingyun, who was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 5th on the Divine List. 4th or 5th? At that time, Gu Xingyun was not at the peak of the invincible realm. In the past few decades, the Dark World's impression of the peak of the invincible realm was that it was powerful, the peak, and irresistible. This realm represented the true upper limit of an individual's combat ability. It represented the top 5 or even the top 3 on the Divine List. This was a combat power that could affect a superpower or superpower. Now, Wang Xiaoyao, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 8th. Li Shi, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, ranked 7th. The peak of the invincible realm, which once represented the top of the Divine List, could only be ranked in the middle this time. The whole Dark World was shaking. Everyone knew that this might be the most terrifying Divine List ranking in the Dark World in hundreds of years. It looks like the whole thing is. The withering Dark World was changing. After the major forces withdrew from the stage, there was less chaos, but more cruelty. What kind of world-shaking figure would be able to ascend to the top of the divine list, which was filled with so much value? After Li Shi. 6th place on the world divine list. Gu Xingyun, the state-protecting war god of Zhongzhou State and the governor of Kunlun City. His breakthrough had been confirmed by the Dark World, and the news that the 3 experts besieged Donghuang had also spread throughout the Dark World. As a newly advanced expert at the peak of the invincible realm, under normal circumstances, he should rank behind Li Shi and even behind Wang Xiaoyao. However, in the end, Gu Xingyun was still ranked 6th in the rankings that all the major forces agreed upon. The reason? The reason was that Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu and Li Kuangtu besieged Li Tianlan together. Although Gu Xingyun was seriously injured, he did not die. This was the only reason, and it was also the reason that all the major countries and forces recognized it. Just because he did not die after besieging Li Tianlan, he was ranked ahead of Li Shi and Wang Xiaoyao. The top 5 of the world divine list, which had always represented the peak of the Dark World's combat power, had already been changed. 5th place on the world divine list. First commander of the Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State, Li Kuangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. This was a ranking that was subject to a lot of controversy but was finally pushed out reluctantly. In fact, in the previous divine list, the 2nd to the 4th would be a little controversial. But since it could be finally determined, it represented the recognition of the whole Dark World. The absolute genius of the Li family in the past, the deity who could once compete with the Sword Emperor, was ranked 5th on the divine list. This had something to do with him being captured by Li Tianlan. But in any case, within 5 years, unless Li Kuangtu could kill the people ahead of him, this ranking would be unshakable. 4th place on the world divine list. There was no title, and there was even little introduction. It was just a name. Jiang Shangyu. Under the information of the divine list, almost everyone listed a lot of battle records. Jiang Shangyu's battle records were the least described, but his battles were the most dangerous. He had fought against Li Tianlan 3 times. His combat capabilities surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Everyone felt that he deserved the 4th place on the world divine list. The top 3 of the world divine list were the peak of the peak. Every name was so dazzling. 3rd place on the world divine list. Former patriarch of the Lin clan, Lin Fengting. Lin Fengting, who rarely fought and was even in a state of seclusion, would fight. His record of fighting was more than Jiang Shangyu's. He was a super veteran expert who had been in the Dark World for decades. As the Lin clan's activities in the Dark World became more and more intense, their former patriarch was finally pushed to the 3rd place on the world divine list. 2nd place on the world divine list. Wang Shengxiao, patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai. This was a ranking that made the Dark World feel emotional, but they had to admit that it was not a wrong ranking. The 2nd place on the world divine list could be said to be a person, or a ray of sword energy. He was Wang Shengxiao. But to some extent, it was the sword energy of Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong that pushed Wang Shengxiao to the 2nd place on the divine list. Perhaps many people would not be convinced by Wang Shengxiao, but who in the Dark World could say no to Wang Tianzong's sword energy? The sword energy was added to Wang Shengxiao. Under the 6 paths of reincarnation, Wang Shengxiao's combat capability would be infinitely close to Wang Tianzong's in the period of Mormons. It was completely natural for him to be ranked 2nd on the divine list. The 1st place on the divine list meant that he was absolutely invincible in today's Dark World. There could be no dispute. It seemed that people had begun to discuss it a few years ago. Until now, it was recognized by all the superpowers, and countless forces in the Dark World. Li Tianlan had a name that was recognized by the whole world. Donghuang. The 1st place on the divine list, the Palace Master of Eastern Palace, Li Tianlan. There was no doubt, no argument, no challenge. Challenge? A day ago, the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th on the divine list had already jointly challenged. They were seriously injured and defeated. A little further away, the 2nd place on the divine list also challenged Li Tianlan and was also defeated. Further away, Moraid, Ramiro, Paul, Wang Xiao, they had confirmed the look in their eyes. They were all people who had been taught a lesson by Li Tianlan. The divine list of the world was shining brightly in the dark world. It was boiling, restless, and spreading. That year, Li Tianlan was about to be 23 years old. He stood at the highest point of the world's martial arts and looked back at the top of the divine list. Behind him were 14 so-called big shots who were equally famous in the dark world. That year, Li Tianlan had not really touched the end of martial arts. But in the current dark world, he was already the Real Supreme. So in his eyes, the so-called world divine list. 14 experts in the invincible realm or beyond the invincible realm. Except for a few friends. The rest were non-entities. Chapter 1203. The sky above Yuzhou City turned bright. In the spacious and luxurious office of the Hidden Dragon Sea, Li Huaqing stared at the computer desktop in front of him and was silent for a long time. He did not expect that he, who had been waiting for the news that Dongqing Wudi brought about the compromise between Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan, would wait for the new ranking on the divine list. The ranking of the divine list was a major event in the dark world. It could even be said to be the top priority. 15 people on the divine list. It could be said that the various superpowers flaunted their military might every year. The ranking was held once every 5 years, and each ranking took about 3 months to sort out and communicate. Li Huaqing knew about the divine list. This started a few months ago. At that time, Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison. The ranking, especially the top ranking, was highly controversial. In the beginning, the European alliance ranked Lin Fengting first. East Island and Star State thought that Li Guangtu should be ranked first. Zhongzhou State recognized Wang Tianzong, who had disappeared in the dark world but did not die. Of course, someone mentioned Li Tianlan. But at that time, Li Tianlan was still in the desert prison and had not entered the invincible realm. No one thought he was the first. However, after several discussions, people had tacitly agreed that Li Tianlan would occupy a place in the top 5 of the divine list. But the next few months were turbulent. After leaving the desert prison, Li Tianlan could be said to have soared to the sky. He was like the blazing sun of this era, hanging in the sky of the dark world, illuminating everything with a light that would never fall. Li Huaqing quietly looked at the list in front of him. The news of the ranking of the divine list swept across the world like a hurricane in the dark world. The first to upload the list was the dark side of the world. Everyone who truly integrated into the dark world knew the dark side of the world. This was not a faction. Instead, it was a website that people in the industry understood but outsiders could not enter no matter what. This was the largest network platform in the dark world. All the words could be translated into the languages of various countries. Any major event in the dark world would appear on the website as soon as possible. The dark side of the world had appeared in the dark world for hundreds of years. Every time the divine list ranking was released, it would be released first. The divine ranking released by the dark side of the world represented absolute authority. It was tantamount to an official announcement. This was a dark forum where countless people were active every day. On the homepage, there were a lot of clear and concise but rich titles, radiating to every corner of the dark world, involving a series of secret transactions such as war employment, time-limited assassinations, arms trade, intelligence trafficking, and so on. The dark world was in turmoil every day, and at least 60% of the transactions were conducted through the dark side of the world. The Dark Forum, originally established by the Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild, had lasted for hundreds of years. Today, all the superpowers in the world, including Zhongzhou State, had a certain proportion of shares in the dark side of the world. It was no exaggeration to say that this was the official forum of the dark world. The post on the forum regarding the new world divine list ranking had been pinned in red. It had been stuck for 5 years, and it would only be removed when the next divine list ranking was announced. Li Huaqing silently opened the pinned post. An incomparably gorgeous list of names appeared in front of him. It was pure black with a hint of hazy scarlet. From Li Tianlan, who ranked first, to Dijiang, who ranked last. In the background of the list, there were countless seals and different styles. and the signatures of all the major countries. The army headquarters of Zhongzhou State, Kunlun City, Star State, Snow Country, the overall seal of the European Alliance, the seals of various European countries, the Shadow Throne, the Wang family of Beihai, Rothschild, the Dark Knights. The seals of all the forces were scattered in various places of the list as the background, providing absolute authority for the list. On the list, 15 golden names were arranged one by one, representing the highest majesty of the dark world. Li Huaqing narrowed his eyes and stared at Li Tianlan's name at the top of the list, his eyes twinkling. The divine list was a feast of the dark world, the ultimate force that all the major countries and forces showed off to the outside world. The dark world had never been peaceful. On the dark web, there were tens of thousands of agents and spies from all countries lurking every day. Countless killers and mercenaries accumulated their wealth in blood and sin. The games and calculations of all countries had never stopped. There were many things in the dark world that everyone had to fight for, but there were also many things that could be solved through negotiation. The ranking of the divine list represented absolute deterrence in a certain sense. Li Tianlan's ranking on the divine list would undoubtedly give Zhongzhou State a great initiative in the next international game. This was the role that a top expert could play for a country. From another perspective, the more Li Tianlan could bring to Zhongzhou State, the more confidence he had to ask for his own treatment. This was a very fair thing. That was to say, with the announcement of the divine list ranking and Li Tianlan's ranking on the top, Li Tianlan had another bargaining chip in his hand for many things in the future. The relationship between Emperor Dong's palace and Zhongzhou State was too subtle. The 2 years in the desert prison was Zhongzhou State's suppression of him. The shuffling of the giant group and the southeast group was also a suppression of him. The storm caused by Chen Fangqing's death also exposed the idea of Zhongzhou State's intention to suppress Emperor Dong's palace. Although this was just an idea that had not been implemented, the reason why it was not implemented had nothing to do with Emperor Dong's palace. And Li Huaqing insisted on protecting Gu Xingyun and suppressing the treason case that year, which to some extent touched the bottom line of Li Tianlan and the entire Li family. Li Huaqing said that he would give Li Tianlan an explanation. But the so-called explanation had not been seen yet, and Li Huaqing intended to forcibly rescue Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan. What would happen to Li Guangtu in Li Tianlan's hands? There would be many possibilities. Maybe Li Guangtu would be imprisoned in Emperor Dong's palace for the rest of his life. Maybe Li Guangtu would desperately fight with Li Tianlan and eventually die in Li Tianlan's hands. Maybe Li Guangtu would let go of the knot in his heart and accept Li Tianlan's position as the leader of the Li family. Maybe there were many possibilities. But what would happen if Zhongzhou State rescued Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan's hands? There was only one result. Zhongzhou State's attitude was almost to support Li Guangtu, to let the purgatory of Heaven Capital and Emperor Dong's palace go tit for tat, even kill each other. Li Huaqing could say that he wanted to balance, talk about the future, talk about the overall situation. Whatever he said was good, dignified, or from the bottom of his heart. In any case, this was his position. From the standpoint of Emperor Dong's palace, Zhongzhou State's move was to let the Li family kill each other to maintain their so-called balance. This was the overall situation in Li Huaqing's eyes. How could Li Tianlan accept it? If suppressing the treason case had made the relationship between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan drop to the freezing point, then Li Huaqing's intention to take Li Guangtu from Li Tianlan was tantamount to crossing Li Tianlan's bottom line. So even if Li Huaqing was the president, in the face of this situation, he had many concerns. He didn't even communicate with Li Tianlan in person. Instead, he asked Dongqing Wudi to go to Shenyuan City. But was this safe? Li Huaqing's eyes began to wander on the divine list again. This year's divine list had changed dramatically. Among them, there were some familiar figures. For example, Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu, Sititang Yue, and Lin Fengting, who had never been on the divine list before but knew the dark world very well. 15 people on the divine list, 17 in the invincible realm, and most of them were newcomers. Wang Shengshao, Jiang Shangyu, Wang Xiaoyao, Wang Wexiangu, These names fiercely impacted the psychological defense line of everyone in the dark world. Especially Li Tianlan, who was on the top of the list, made everyone feel unbelievable and at the same time sincerely convinced. This list was full of the old and the new. This was because the name list of the two intersecting eras had officially begun to reveal the era of Donghuang. Donghuang was 23 years old. Li Huaqing could find countless reasons why Li Tianlan did not dare to fall out with Zhongzhou State. But he could also find several reasons why Li Tianlan dared to fall out with him. At 23 years old, he was invincible in the world. At this age, no matter what he did, it wouldn't be too surprising. In the cold morning temperature, Li Huaqing took a light breath. Li Tianlan's ranking first on the divine list would bring great benefits to Zhongzhou State. But the premise was that Li Tianlan still belonged to Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing had never thought of expelling Li Tianlan from Zhongzhou State. But in the current situation, if he wanted to stabilize Emperor Dong's palace, he had to pay more. During the period when the divine list was announced and caused a sensation, if Li Tianlan was forced out of Zhongzhou State because of Li Guangtu, then Zhongzhou State would become the laughingstock of the dark world for at least a few decades in the future. And Li Tianlan, who was forced out of Zhongzhou State, would also become a nightmare that made Zhongzhou State breathless in the next few decades. This was the most unacceptable situation for Li Huaqing. Not to mention how many irresistible disasters Li Tianlan would bring to Zhongzhou State in such a situation. If Li Tianlan was really not in Zhongzhou State, there was no doubt that Jiang Shangyu and even Gu Xingyun, who were more ambitious, would be out of control. In such a sensitive situation, facing several top experts in the dark world, even Li Huaqing had to carefully control them. They were undoubtedly godly weapons that could shock the world. But if one did not control the godly weapons well, they would be the first to be decapitated. Li Tianlan wanted to stay here. Li Guangtu wanted to save him. Jiang Shangyu and Gu Xingyun also had to stay. This was Li Huaqing's bottom line. Once the balance formed by these people was out of control, it might be the beginning of the decline of Zhongzhou State's national power. The delicate relationship between Zhongzhou State and Emperor Dong's palace was no secret now. This was something that could not be hidden at all. With the announcement of the divine list, there must have been a lot of people secretly ready to take action, ready to find a suitable time to extend an olive branch to Li Tianlan. What should Li Huaqing do? In the long silence, Li Huaqing stood up from the smoky office. Do what you should do. That was his answer. He walked out of the office. Ma Si, who had already gone to work and was sorting out the materials, stood up immediately. Li Huaqing did not give Ma Si a chance to speak. He waved his hand and ordered in a low voice, "Get ready. We'll go to Tianan now." Chapter 1204. Light was the purest color. The faintly discernible light shone in wisps, dancing in the bedroom as if it were alive. It spread, decomposed, and finally turned into tiny imperceptible light particles. The light particles touched the ubiquitous sword energy around them. Li Tianlan could clearly feel the faint vitality contained in the light particles. Xinyuan Wushang stood beside him. The light radiated from his palm. His face was flushed with anger, embarrassment, and a hint of embarrassment. The light particles slowly integrated into Li Guangtu's body, who was in a coma. Li Guangtu's aura gradually stabilized at a very slow speed, and then began to strengthen little by little. There was no medicine, no equipment, and no assistance. Xinyuan Wushang stood in front of Li Guangtu, and there was only the pure light constantly radiating from his palm. Li Tianlan watched this scene quietly, slightly narrowing his eyes. Xinyuan Wushang had saved people twice. The first time was to save Wang Yuexianga, and the second time was to save Xiao Mahai, the majordomo of Emperor Dong's palace. But this was the first time Li Tianlan saw him make a move. Saint, who was lucky enough to see Xinyuan Wushang's treatment process, had roughly described the scene at that time and accurately summarized it in 8 words. The holy light was wanton and surging. Xinyuan Wushang was a doctor. But it was definitely not a conventional way for him to save people. The light rippled, and it could even be said to be a special ability. Li Tianlan didn't know whether there was such a thing as a special ability in this world. The wisps of light that bloomed from Xianyuan Wushang's hand were barely within his understanding. If he thought about it carefully, the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state in his body seemed to have a similar effect as the light in Xianyuan Wushang's hand. They were both pure and rich vitality. But the dragon vein could only work on him. And Xianyuan Wushang had mastered this vitality. Therefore, he could be said to be the most brilliant doctor in this era. But the holy light was overflowing and surging. Li Tianlan frowned and looked at the dim light particles in the air that seemed to disappear at any time. The light particles barely formed light spots when they gathered, and then quickly dimmed. No matter how low the standard was, the scene in front of him didn't seem to be surging. Li Tianlan watched Xianyuan Wushang toss and turn with an embarrassed face for nearly half an hour. Li Guangtu's aura was indeed increasing. However, he was still in a comatose state. This was completely different from what the saint had reported. Ji Song of the Healing Moon, 40 seconds. It took less than half a minute to heal Xiao Mahai. The treatment for Li Guangtu had been going on for 30 minutes, but it still didn't seem to be working. Li Tianlan knew about Li Guangtu's injury. Strictly speaking, his injury was much more serious than Xiao Mahai's and Mochizuki's at that time, but Li Guangtu's physical strength was also far stronger than Mochizuki's and Xiao Mahai's. After all, Li Tianlan didn't want to kill Li Guangtu. When he made a move, he didn't go too far and even took into account the internal injury of Li Guangtu. Jiang Shangyu obviously knew this, so he had no choice but to let Li Guangtu stay. If it were him or Gu Xingyun instead of Li Guangtu, the moment Li Tianlan made a move, one of them would definitely die. Therefore, if they were in the same physical strength, there was no reason for Li Guangtu's injury to be more serious than Xiao Mahai's. Li Tianlan frowned and suddenly said calmly, "Just heal him. It doesn't matter even if you let him return to his peak state. Don't worry about anything." His voice was very light, but it contained extreme calmness and confidence. Xianyuan Wushang's mouth twitched, and he became more and more embarrassed. Of course, he knew that he didn't have to worry about anything. Even if he did, it was not Li Guangtu. With Li Tianlan's current level, even if Li Guangtu was in his peak state, what threat could he pose? But in fact, although he was a little embarrassed to say it, he twitched the corner of his mouth and finally said, "I've tried my best." Yes, this was a situation that even Xianyuan Wushang himself didn't expect. He had tried his best, but it still ended up like this. He knew that the real environment had resealed the earth, and he could feel it, but he didn't expect that it would be sealed to this extent. Compared with before the seal, the strength of the real environment now was more than 100 times stronger. This directly led to a crazy decline in Xianyuan Wushang's healing ability. Now he could still be said to be the top doctor, and even could be said to be the best, but it was difficult for him to create miracles. In the real environment, there were no miracles. Countless rays of light drifted in the bedroom. After another half an hour, Li Guangtu still didn't wake up. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and glanced at Xianyuan Wushang. Xianyuan Wushang stopped and seemed to observe Li Guangtu. He nodded and said, "There's no problem, but he probably still needs to rest, so he won't wake up for the time being." "How long?" Li Tianlan asked in a flat voice. "About 12 hours. Xianyuan Wushang answered after thinking for a while. "Let's go and eat something." Li Tianlan's figure flickered. He didn't stay in the bedroom. There was no need to leave any protective measures behind. His sword energy had completely covered every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Within the scope of his sword energy, every grass, every tree, and even every trace of air in Emperor Dong's palace turned into peerless sword light in an instant. Wherever the sword energy passed, it became Li Tianlan's home field. Xianyuan Wushang followed Li Tianlan, narrowing his eyes and observing silently. In this state, Li Tianlan moved very slowly. But everyone could be sure that Li Tianlan wasn't walking. His whole body was like a bad signal, appearing and disappearing from time to time, bringing an extremely unreal but absolutely real feeling. Every wisp of sword energy that swept through Emperor Dong's palace became a part of his body. He kept changing positions with the sword energy. In a sense, This was a kind of sharpening and practice for his swordsmanship. Every wisp of sword energy that swept through the field was him, but also not him. None of them were him. Xianyuan Wushang frowned. Brother. This title naturally came out of his mouth. Li Tianlan also responded naturally. Where is your real body? Xianyuan Wushang's tone was a little complicated. Li Tianlan fell silent. He was silent for a long time. His figure flickered lightly in front of Xianyuan Wushang. Li Tianlan, who could flash without walking, didn't say softly until he was out of the castle, "Now it should be my real body." Should be? Xianyuan Wushang suddenly felt a little cold all over. It doesn't matter. Li Tianlan shook his head. Xianyuan Wushang thought that if this wasn't important, what else was important? He had reached such a high level in swordsmanship that he wasn't even sure whether he was his real body or not. Can you walk now? Xianyuan Wushang smiled a little reluctantly, with a sense of testing. Li Tianlan nodded. But compared to walking, it saves more energy and is more focused. Xianyuan Wushang seemed to understand something, but also seemed to have a lot of things he didn't understand. He shook his head slightly and sighed. What's wrong? Li Tianlan glanced at him. Nothing. Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said softly, I'm just thinking that in your current state, compared with Xianyuan Feng, who is also in his heyday with full energy, he paused and looked into Li Tianlan's eyes. Between you and it, who is the sharpest sword in the dark world? Chapter 1205. Li Tianlan smiled casually and did not answer Xianyuan Wushang's seemingly inexplicable question. He just said, Are you sure you only want a small clinic? Xianyuan Wushang stared blankly for a moment, then smiled. Of course, that suits me very well. Both Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian would join Emperor Dong's palace, which had been decided from the day they appeared. At that time, Emperor Dong's palace wasn't sure about Xianyuan Wushang's ability, so it didn't assign him any duties. After treating Xiao Mahai and Mochizuki Song, Xianyuan Wushang showed his ability, but the death of Chen Fangqing and other things messed up the situation. Although the situation was still turbulent, the internal situation of Emperor Dong's palace had stabilized. Li Tianlan naturally did not intend to let him be an idler. Go lead the biology lab. The controllable energy in Xianyuan Wushang was the purest vitality. If Xianyuan Wushang joined the biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace, even if he knew nothing, he could improve the efficacy of the gene medicine that Emperor Dong's palace was developing by several levels with this energy alone. The clinic is good. I think it's the most suitable for me. Xianyuan Wushang shook his head without hesitation and said with a smile, I'm best at treating headaches, fever, colds, fever, and diarrhea. I'm really tired of looking at all the data, parameters, graphs, and combinations in the laboratory. As for the biological laboratory, I can roughly provide you with some formulas, but not much. It's probably going to be difficult to gather the materials, but that's about it. Xianyuan Wushang was now a holy disciple. The starting point for a holy disciple was level 1. There was a name that made Xianyuan Wushang feel a little helpless: nurse. In the current medical field, he was definitely an expert. Even the saint beside Lin Shi could not compare to him. However, under the current circumstances, he could not be of much help. He could naturally lead and play a role in the work of the biological laboratory. In fact, whether it was the biological laboratory headed by Nailan Shuring in Emperor Dong's palace or the biological laboratory of the Wang family of Beihai that was unrivaled in the world, Xianyuan Wushang had experienced a long, long time ago. In theory, some of the topics that Nailan Shuring was tackling, the various aspects of ideas, and the bottlenecks that she had encountered were not a problem in Xianyuan Wushang's eyes. It was just like how most adults wouldn't be troubled by the question of 1 + 1. But the problem was that even if one knew the exact answer, if one's eyes couldn't see, ears couldn't hear, mouth couldn't speak, and hands couldn't move, he wouldn't be able to tell others the exact answer. Xianyuan Wushang wasn't blind or mute, but there were some things he couldn't do anything about. He knew what Nailan Shuring and the Wang family of Beihai were attacking now. Here, It should be called the eternal third generation. This was something developed by the war god realm and the human emperor palace when they first rose to power. Now, it was called the dew of life in those two forces. Anything that could increase one's vitality wouldn't be cheap anywhere, but the dew of life wasn't that rare either. At the very least, the war god realm and the human emperor palace, which consisted of hundreds of millions of human soldiers, regardless of whether they were elites or ordinary soldiers, would have a few bottles. As for the potions of the life series, they were no longer named after generations, nor were they some sort of breakthrough improvement. The dew of life, the blood of life, the torrent of life, the spring of life, across lakes, rivers, oceans, and even the last treasure of the war god realm, the real immortality potion, each potion was countless times better. It was the real immortality potion that helped Li Tianlan directly enter the invincible realm from a seriously injured state. Even if it was absolutely suppressed by the real environment, it still played an incredible role. Judging from Xianyuan Wushang's real level, in theory, it wasn't difficult for him to make the ocean of life potion. In theory, that was to say, from a purely technical point of view, the problem was that there were no corresponding materials, let alone sophisticated equipment. The apostles around Linxi could make the equipment, but no one could do anything about the materials. If Qin Weibai completely returned to her peak state, she might be able to do it, but it was obviously impossible. Xianyuan Wushang could provide Emperor East with several gene potion formulas that could be made in the current environment. If he said anything more, not to mention whether he could do it, even if he could, it would go against his original intention as a guide. What about Xing Tian? Li Tianlan asked. In the final battle in North Sea, Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian were in East Island. Compared with the low-key but mysterious Xianyuan Wushang, Xing Tian had a record of fighting. The only superior of the invincible realm that the sanctuary had cultivated for more than 2 years died in Xing Tian's hands. What was more tragic was that Li Tianlan still didn't know the name of the invincible realm expert, nor did the whole dark world. He said he wanted to be a PE teacher. Xianyuan Wushang looked at Li Tianlan and whispered, "There is no school in Emperor East Palace now." Li Tianlan was expressionless, and his voice was a little cold. There was a school in Shenyuan City now, and Ning Chenqing also ambitiously proposed a plan to build Tianan University, but it was still far away. He couldn't just casually arrange Xing Tian to be a PE teacher in an ordinary school, could he? "You don't want to contribute to Shenyuan City," Li Tianlan said lightly. "We have no choice." Xianyuan Wushang thought for a while and said seriously, "We can help, such as treating the injuries of Moongaze and Song. But we can help. It's difficult for me to do anything else. Our task is not to interfere with the development of Emperor East Palace. At least at this stage, Xing Tian and I can only be onlookers in Emperor East Palace." But Li Tianlan's eyes were cold. Xianyuan Wushang frowned and whispered, "Because the rise of Emperor East Palace must be real. Absolutely real." His voice seemed to be subconsciously heavier when he said the last few words. After a pause, Xianyuan Wushang continued with a smile, "Similarly, this is also my father's order." "Your father?" Li Tianlan nodded, as if he was thinking about the importance of the other party. He had a son like Xianyuan Wushang, and even a servant like Xing Tian? The importance of the other party was self-evident. But was there really such a person? If there was, where was he? "He's not as powerful as you think." Xianyuan Wushang smiled and said, "At least here, if my father fought with you, he probably wouldn't be a match for you." He was referring to the current Li Tianlan and the energetic Ruthless. Although he didn't say it explicitly, it was not wrong to say it that way. He's been friends with you for a long time, and he really hopes to meet you at the right time. Xianyuan Wushang continued. "He knows me?" Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. "We've been friends with each other for a long time." Xianyuan Wushang said, "I'm curious about what kind of person he is." Li Tianlan laughed. Xianyuan Wushang hesitated and whispered, "I'm not qualified to comment on my father. I think he's a great man, but he doesn't think so of himself." Li Tianlan looked back at him with interest. "How does he comment on himself? An unqualified guardian. Idiot." Li Tianlan looked at Xinyuan Wushang with a stiff expression. He had never met Xinyuan Wushang's father, but he knew that he was an unfathomable figure. To comment on himself as an idiot, he was indeed unfathomable. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he suddenly said, "What about me? What does your father think of me?" Xinyuan Wushang glanced at Li Tianlan weakly. His voice was even lower, as low as a mosquito's hum. "Big idiot. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.